power, and we want the freedom. So this is the inclusive idea of nationhood and nationalism. And in this view of nationalism, the Taj Mahal is a symbol of our inheritance, our heritage, as much as the ruins of the Harappan civilization, or the sculptures at Ajanta Ellora, or even the petroglyphs or the rock carvings at Edakil caves. But there is also an alternative idea of nation and nationalism that has been with us for almost a century, for about a century, and which takes inspiration from ideas of nationhood that was prevalent in Europe in the 1920s, a century ago, and which ultimately led to World War II. And in this definition of nation and nationalism, nation is defined by the race, religion, or language of a majority community, and those who do not belong to it do not deserve to be full citizens. In this idea of nationhood, in India, for example, the Taj Mahal will not be a symbol of common heritage. It will be a symbol of shame, because it was made not by people whose ancestors may have come from elsewhere. And M.K. Gandhi, who brought the whole nation together to fight against the British and brought everybody together, will not be a hero, will be a villain, and the man who killed him, Godse, will be a hero. So it is not just recent history that is grist to the mill of an exclusive kind of nationalist ideology. Prehistory is even more so. A prehistory is defined as what happened before people started writing in different parts of the world at different points of time. So prehistory often deals with origins of people, of population groups. And origins are important to an exclusivist idea of nationhood, because where you come from determines how much of a part of the common nation you are or you are not. And this is the reason why we fight over such questions as whether Indo-Aryan language-speaking people who call themselves Arya came from outside into India, or they went from India to elsewhere. In most countries, this will not exercise. It will not be an issue to fight over for most people. It will be an academic question. But when we have contending ideas of nationhood and nationalism, this becomes a matter of a political fight. This is the background to be kept in mind. With this background in mind, let's now try and see if we can put the light of scientific evidence and data to answer the contentious questions of history and of our origins without the filter of ideologies. Questions such as, who were the first Indians and first modern humans in this land? Where did they come from, and where can we find them today? Who were the Harappans? Who built the Harappan civilization? Where did they disappear? And after the Harappan civilization declined due to a long drought, why did it take more than 1,000 years for cities to rise up in India again? Who were the people who called themselves Arya? Where did they come from? Just a few years ago, there would have been no good way of answering many of these questions. They were unsettled, at least many of those questions were unsettled. But things have changed quite a bit in recent years. And part of the reason is a new discipline called population genetics, which can sequence the DNA of different population groups and understand how closely or distantly they are related. Population geneticists have been studying the DNA of currently living populations for decades. But recently, this field took a quantum leap forward because it acquired the ability to extract and analyze ancient DNA, that's the DNA of people who lived tens of thousands or tens of thousands of years ago. Until they acquired this ability, population genetics could say that this population group is related to that population group and this closely, but it could not say how did that relationship happen. For example, in 2009, a genetic study that was published said that the North Indians are more closely related to West Eurasians, that is West Asians, Central Asians, and Europeans, than South Indians. But that study could not say, but how did that relationship come about? Did the West Eurasians move into North India, or the Indians move into West Eurasia? This is the problem that the ancient DNA has solved. I will explain how. Let's say there is an archaeological site in Thiruvananthapuram, and that you have recovered DNA from a level that is 3,000 years BCE, and also from 2,000 years BCE. That's 5,000 years ago and 4,000 years ago. Let's say in the DNA recovered from 5,000 years ago, there is no sign of West Asian ancestry. But let's say that from the DNA recovered from the 2,000 or 4,000 years ago level, there is ancestry of a West Asian kind. Then it is a clear conclusion to make that between those two periods, there is a new ancestry that came into Thiruvananthapuram. Now, this is the change that ancient DNA has made to understanding of migrations that happened tens of thousands of years ago. And this has changed our understanding of prehistory around the world, not just in India. This is important because often when we talk about origins of India or the new change that is happening, it is assumed that we are finding new things just in India, but this is important that the prehistory all over the world is being rewritten as new understandings about population movements that happened thousands of years ago, brings new understanding. For example, we now know that Europe, in just the last 10,000 years, Europe saw two major population changes, which are complete population churn. The first churn happened about 9,000 years ago when farmers from the region earlier known as Anatolia and now known as Turkey moved into Europe, displaced or mixed with the then existing hunter-gatherers of Europe. And this was not all. Then again, 5,000 years ago, pastoralists from Central Asia moved into Europe, mixing with or replacing the then existing farmers and still existing groups of hunter-gatherers from earlier, and significantly changed. So Europe went through two major population churn in just the last 10,000 years. In the Americas that we know, that after 16,000 years ago, it was populated by at least 3 migrations from Asia. This is obviously much before Europeans ever landed up in the Americas. In East Asia, we know that the entire population was changed at least twice, in both times because of migration starting from the agricultural heartland of China. So this is how we are today gaining a much better understanding of population formation in different parts of the world. In many ways, you could say that there are migrations that happen all the time across all of the world, in all the places. But you could say that there are 4 classes of migrations that really stand out for both the impact they had on global demography and, equally importantly, because they were driven by global forces, by which I mean that when we look back, we can see why those migrations happened when they did. They were all driven by global forces, and they changed global demography. The first class of migration is what is commonly known as the out of Africa migration. That happened around 70,000 years ago, when a group of Africans, probably not more than a few hundred people, successfully moved out from Africa into Asia, into the Arabian Peninsula, and then over the next thousands of years went on to populate all of the non-African world. So the last continent they populated was this stream of populated was the Americas, and that happened 16,000 years ago. So from 70,000 years ago to 16,000 years ago, that's the time span it took for this small band of out of Africa migrants and their descendants over time to populate the whole of the rest of the non-African world. How do we know this? We know this from genetics. All of the populations outside of Africa, we know from genetics, actually are descendants of a small subset of the African population which moved out of Africa about 70,000 years ago. And then when that population, where the out of Africa population was filling out the world over thousands of years. Remember, we are talking about generations and generations and generations, not somebody in one generation moving across continents. We are talking about vast amounts of time. So as they were filling out the world, a glacial period intervened between 29,000 years ago and about 14,000 years ago. Very large, that's about 15,000. Very large, long period of glacial period. What that meant was that different population groups in different parts of the world got separated from each other, because during glacial periods, it's a period of great aridity. Lands that had been lush and green turn into deserts. Large parts of the world become uninhabitable. So glacial periods, then, that happened around this time. Different human populations got separated and evolved slightly along different lines, accumulating minor differences over time. The glacial period ended, and the world started warming up again around 12,000 years ago. And that's when we see the ground being laid for the next major round of migrations that affected the whole world. And because when the world started warming up again after this glacial period, many modern human populations across the world started experimenting with agriculture. Not all of those experiments were successful. Not all those that were successful were sustainable, and not all those were successful and sustainable were very advantageous. They did not make a big difference. But those modern human population groups who were in geographical locations where they had the opportunity to domesticate cereal and cultivate cereal, they found themselves to be in a very great advantageous position. Those are the Indians, the Chinese, the Mesopotamians, the Egyptians in the Nile Valley. Others, like let's say the Pacific Islanders or others who domesticated agriculture and started agriculture with tubers, yams, bananas, could not find similar kind of productivity. So in these lands where people transitioned into agriculture, and people started settling down, and what happened was a boom, a population booms that happened all across, where people took to large-scale cereal cultivation. And the natural result of those population explosion that arose out of agricultural transition was large-scale migrations into new areas. So this is the second class of global migrations that changed demography all across the world. So you could call them the Neolithic migrations or the farming migrations, and they're caused by population expansion resulting from agricultural transition. The third set of migrations, third class of migrations, you could tentatively call the Bronze Age migrations. This has happened when some modern human population groups mastered the art of metallurgy and the art of making arms, and also they gained mastery over horse, which gave them huge advantage in terms of mobility. And what this caused, as you can imagine, was a substantive demographic change over a very large part of Eurasia, from the westernmost part of Europe to West Asia to South Asia to China. These are the Bronze Age migrations that affected a very large part of the world. These three migrations happened by and large in what we could call prehistory, that is before writing had begun in most parts of the world. But the next one happened, which we are all familiar with. There are the colonial migrations, when some modern human population groups acquired mastery over the seas to travel fast overseas, get to new areas and make colonies. And this also changed demography in large parts of the world, in Latin America, for example, in Australia, for example. So these are the four. I would think that we are today probably in the fifth major class of migration, but this is something future historians will have to write about sometime in the future, but driven by differences in differences in GDP or growth, as well as differences in population growth. But as I said, I just said that just to say that many of the population movements, migration that happened have global forces. There are reasons behind them. There are global forces behind them. You need to understand that before you understand how different populations formed. Now comes the question. So which of these migrations, classes of migrations, shaped the Indian population? We already know that the fourth one, the colonial migrations, did not leave a big mark on India. The numbers of the British or any of the European powers that came here was too small compared to the existing population of India. So they left no large or discernible mark on Indian demography. So if you really want to understand who we are and how our population formed, what you need to look at are the three first classes of migrations, the out of Africa migrations, and we had two Neolithic or farming migrations, which we will talk about in greater detail. One from West Asia in regions that are today called Iran, Zagros region, mountain region. This happened around 9,000 years ago. And then again from East Asia, around 4,000 years ago. And a Bronze Age pastoralist migration from the steppe around 4,000 to 3,000 years ago. These are the migrations that shaped us, our population, India. We'll go into it in some detail. To begin at the beginning, if we ask who are the first Indians, the answer is the same, whether we are talking about the first Chinese, first Australians, first whatever, first Americans, they are all descendants of the original out of Africa migrants. So our first Indians are people who came from the descendants of the out of Africa migrants. But when did they reach India? We know that it has to be after 70,000 years ago, but how long did it take before they reached India? We do not have a direct fossil evidence of modern humans that long ago to be able to give a direct answer from India, but we have fossil evidence from other regions such as Sri Lanka, Southeast Asia and Australia to give us a fair idea of when they reached. The modern human fossils from Sri Lanka have now recently been dated to 50,000 years ago. We have fossil evidence from Australia that says modern humans were there at least by 59,000 years ago. We know from East Asia that they were there at least by 63,000 years ago. These are recent findings in the last 2 years. And there is also the general consensus that they would have gone through India and South Asia to reach these regions. So therefore, it's a reasonable conclusion that the first modern humans arrived in India around 65,000 years ago. So what kind of a country, what kind of a land did they arrive? Where did they arrive into a land where they had not much competition, no other Homo species? Like the modern humans in the Americas or in Australia. We know for a fact that that was not the case. They came into a land that was majorly robustly populated by other Homo species, just as in Europe or in many parts of Southeast Asia. India was robustly populated by other Homo species. We do not know which of the Homo species they were, because we have only one skull fragment dated to about 265,000 years ago from Narmada, and we have not been able to say which exact lineage they belong to. Then how do we know that they were here in such abundance? We know that from the other kind of evidence that they have left behind, which are stone tools. And there is no shortage of them. And from them we know that the other Homo species were in abundant presence in central India and South India. In essentially, the peninsular India was the region where the other Homo species were very much had a great presence. The earliest stone tool that has recovered from India is from a place called Athirampakam near Chennai, and that is 1.5 million years ago. Just imagine. We are saying the first modern human arrived in India around 65,000 years ago, but we have evidence that other Homo species has been in India for 5 times as long as that. So that's why when you say that when the first modern humans arrived in India, archaeologists believe it's unlikely that they moved or settled down all over all of the part. They are likely to have stayed away from the way of the established settled populations. We often think that when modern humans arrived, they were of a vastly superior nature to other Homo species. This is just conceit. This is not true. Modern humans are not vastly superior to other Homo species. In fact, some of the other Homo species had larger brains than us. The kind of tools that we made for most of the time that they shared the earth together were indistinguishable from each other. So it made sense for modern humans to stay away from the way of settled populations. Archaeologists believe that it is likely that they stayed in the sub-Himalayan region with their descendants then going across to Southeast Asia and Australia. It is also likely that another branch came down the coastal route, western coastal route, staying out of the central part of India, and then went on to Sri Lanka, perhaps coming back up the eastern coast, and then going on across to Southeast Asia. So if that the term that the archaeologists use for this is called Indian staged dispersal, in the sense that they reach different parts of India at different periods of time. But is there a time period when we could say that the first modern humans in India were in charge, were dominant in the Indian subcontinent? Yes, there is. That's around 35,000 years ago. That's around 30,000 years after they arrived. You could say there is enough reason to suspect that they were in control of the entire continent. We also know that all the other Homo species went extinct. We do not know when exactly they went extinct, but they did go extinct, leaving only the modern humans around the world. They went extinct everywhere. Why do we say 35,000 years ago? Because many things come together at that time. One is that we see increasing evidence of modern humans, increasing evidence of microliths. Microliths are tiny stone tools, not more than a few centimeters long, which are hafted on to bones or wood and used as spears, arrows, and new lethal weaponry. So around 35,000 years ago, we see, and only modern humans have been closely associated with microliths. So there is a significant improvement in the arms used by the modern humans around 35,000 years ago. That is also the time when there is the climate begins deteriorating as it moves towards the glacial period. So as the climate deteriorates, there is competition for living space because there are less habitable areas. And third, geneticists say around this time, the modern human population in India starts expanding rapidly. So put all these three things together, it seems to be a reasonable conclusion that as the climate starts deteriorating, modern humans start using better technology of microliths, and they start moving into areas which they had stayed away from earlier, and they are successful because their population starts increasing rapidly. So by around 35,000 years ago, it's possible that modern humans were in control of the subcontinent. In fact, geneticists say that by around 20,000 years ago, India was the center of the modern human population in the world. So whenever anybody is, next time when you read that South Asia or India is a very large population, please remember that it's nothing new. It's a very long track record that we have been keeping for thousands of years, tens of thousands of years, because this land has been good to the Homo species, whether Homo sapiens or those who came before them. That's the a short history of the first Indians. We will speak more about them because they are the ones that we are most closely related to. We'll know more about them later. Before we move on, please remember that the next major migration that we're talking about, that's the farming-related migration, start happening only around 9,000 years ago. The out of Africa migrations happened 65,000 years ago. So there is a long period of time when the out of Africa migrants who reached India in 65,000 years ago, they spread out over the entire continent, over the entire subcontinent, and it's a large population. So now we move into the this is a sample home of the first Indians. This is from Bhimbedka. If you haven't been there, it's not very far from, it's in Madhya Pradesh, not very far from Bhopal. It's a fascinating site to visit. And this is a rock shelter, which archaeologists say has been in almost continuous use for about 100,000 years. 100,000 years. So it's it's absolutely stunning. I think if I had to choose between Antilia and this rock shelter in Bhimbedka, I would probably choose the rock shelter. The site, the view that you get is fabulous. The shelter itself is very inviting. So no wonder that it was in heavy demand, both among Homo sapiens and the others. Why? Because it was occupied for 100,000 years. Homo sapiens, as the modern humans, arrived only 65,000 years ago. So for most of the period, it was occupied by other Homo species. So this is just a home of the first Indians. Now we come to the second major migration that shaped our demography, which is the first farmers. When I started on this project 6 years ago, the question on my mind actually was not who were the Indians, how did the Indian population form. It was a much more limited question, which was who were the Harappans, and where did they disappear, where can we find them? Because I've been fascinated by the Harappan civilization ever since I learned about it in school, and I missed no opportunity to read up more. But it always intrigued me that these questions had not been answered. So we didn't know were they our ancestors or were they not. Did they build it and then they go back somewhere else? This is the question that I started inquiring into 6 years ago, when I would start going into all the Harappan sites in India, from Dholavira and Lothal in Gujarat to Rakhigarhi in Haryana, and follow that up with meetings with archaeologists, philologists, all different people, scientists from different disciplines who had written papers and on the Harappan civilization, all of which was very helpful. It answered many of my questions, but left many more questions unanswered, until I realized that you cannot answer the questions about the Harappans until you went back thousands of years earlier, because the Harappan civilization, it is clear from the archaeological record, is a natural outgrowth of the agriculture revolution that happened. It's in the northwestern region. It's a natural outgrowth. You can see villages, agriculture happening, then slowly villages rising, villages becoming fortified, then towns rising. So it's a natural outgrowth of agriculture. So the answer to the question, who were the Harappans, has to come from who were the first farmers, and who started the farming in northwestern India. And the first sign, the earliest evidence of agriculture in the Indian subcontinent comes from a place called Mehergarh in Baluchistan in today's Pakistan. And that dates to around 7000 BCE, or about 9,000 years ago. And when we start to see, that's when we start to see evidence of wheat and barley cultivation and animal domestication, especially of goats. Another place called Lahuradeva in the Middle Ganga plain in Uttar Pradesh, we can also see evidence of wild rice harvesting. It has not yet, it's not clear if and when it moved into actual cultivation of not just harvesting but actual cultivation of rice. But in any case, we know that at that time there were experiments. These would have been first Indians too, right? There were experiments in agriculture happening across the world, including in India. But we know that the experiments in Lahuradeva did not lead on to a rice-based civilization in the Middle Ganga region. But we know that the barley and wheat-based agricultural revolution in northwestern India ultimately did lead to the Harappan civilization. So who were the people who were the first farmers and the Harappans? It's genetic studies based on ancient DNA recovered from the mature Harappan period. That's from 2600 BCE to 1900 BCE has answered the question of what was the genetic composition of the Harappans. They were an admixed population of first Indians and West Asians. Or West Asian, or to be more specific, agriculturalists from the Zagros region of today's Iran, which is on the eastern borders of what's known as the Fertile Crescent region in West Asia, which is one of the earliest regions in the world to transition to agriculture. So agriculture is from the Zagros region of Iran, mixed with the first Indians, and they are the Harappans. And as we know, the Harappans are the same as the first farmers. So that's the population group that spread agriculture across northwestern India. And it's possible that the first Indians were already experimenting with agriculture in northwestern India, because we know that the domestication of the humped bull or the humped cattle, zebu cattle, happened in India. We know that from genetic studies. We also know that the water buffalo was domesticated in India. So there is significant domestication happening in India. It's possible that the migrants from West Asia brought barley and wheat, and probably goat. So it's a combined population of these two populations that spread agriculture across northwestern India. But the amazing thing is that even though the genetic evidence came only recently, as in last year, archaeological studies done in Mehergarh in 1980s provide strong support to this conclusion. And it's a archaeologist, French archaeologist called Jean-François Jarige, who led the archaeological excavation at Mehergarh. And he said there are strong similarities between the archaeological findings of Mehergarh and those from the Zagros region, from sites such as Ganj Dareh and Alikosh. Remember, Ganj Dareh and Alikosh are archaeological sites in the Zagros region. We will come across that again, so keep that in mind. To quote the archaeologist Jarige, the full setting of the farming economy at Mehergarh displays evident similarities with what had been noticed in the case of the early Neolithic settlements in the hilly regions forming the eastern border of Mesopotamia, which is the same as the Zagros region that we are talking about. What exactly were those similarities? Here are some. Same kind of houses built with the same kind of narrow bricks, about 60 centimeters long, with similar finger marks for keying in the mortar. Circular fire pits with burnt pebbles, which are used to cook bread, which is the same way that bread is cooked in Balochistan still even today. Polished stone axes made of black diorite, red paint on the walls of structures, the way skeletons were positioned in burials, baskets coated with bitumen, oblong shaped, I can go on, it's a very long list. So much so that Jarich calls it a cultural continuum between the Zagros region and what is found at Mehergarh. So the recent genetic finding is supported strongly by already existing archaeological finding from the 1980s. So the most reasonable story that we can now tell is that of an agricultural revolution happening in northwestern India, beginning from around 9,000 years ago, spearheaded by a mixed population of first Indians and West Asians. They then go on to create the world's largest civilization. This we often don't realize. The Harappan civilization was the largest civilization of its time. It's as big as the Mesopotamian and the Egyptian civilizations put together in terms of both area and in terms of people. The area was about 1 million square kilometers, which is about 1/3 the size of India today. So, and this was a civilization that had, to a large extent, standardized weights and measures, had a common script, had very similar ways of building cities, very often which they are in some ways grid-based, and so very large level of standardization, and that civilization, its mature form alone continued for 700 years, and you can imagine it's inconceivable today that could have happened without modern methods of communication or transport. So my book talks about in detail about the Harappan civilization. It's the chapter I enjoyed writing most, but I will have to skip over it for the purposes of this talk. Now we come to some really interesting part of it. Now we said archaeology and genetics supports the links and who the Harappans were. The fascinating thing is linguistics also supports the conclusion that we have arrived at through the other methods, and this has implications. The earliest civilization to rise in the Zagros region was a civilization called Elam, and the language that they spoke, which went extinct more than 2,000 years ago, their language was called Elamite. The Elamite civilization rose only around 2700 BCE, but as we read earlier, the migrants from West Asia, from the Zagros region, arrived thousands of years earlier. They arrived around 9,000 years ago or earlier, or around 7,000 BCE. So the migrants from the same Zagros region were not products of urban Elam civilization, but they were prior to that civilization. So it is likely to think, it's likely that they spoke a language that was also prior to Elamite, which we can tentatively call Proto-Elamite. So if the people who came from the Zagros region to northwestern India and were part of the population that formed the Harappan civilization spoke a form of Proto-Elamite, it is likely that Proto-Elamite was at least one of the languages of the Harappan civilization, if not the dominant one. And considering the kind of impact Harappan civilization had, it should have left behind a mark in the Indian civilization. Is there such a mark? The fascinating answer is there is. Long before the Harappan civilization was discovered, Harappan civilization was discovered only in the 1920s. Before that, nobody had any clue that there is such a thing. So long before the Harappan civilization was discovered, linguists working in Dravidian languages were already suggesting a connection between Elamite and Dravidian. The first suggestion came from from a person, Edwin Norris, who helped decipher the well-known Behistun inscription in Iran of Emperor Darius. He had studied the inscription of Emperor Darius, and he pointed out that the Elamite script, which was used in that inscription, worked on the same principles as Tamil. In 1856, 3 years later, Robert Caldwell, who wrote the first grammar of the Dravidian family of languages, put forward Elamite as the suggested affiliation for Tamil. Much later, in 1981, a very well-known linguist named David McAlpin wrote a very influential paper titled Proto-Elamo-Dravidian Key Evidence and Implications, again suggesting a link between Dravidian languages and the Proto-Elamite languages. And this paper was further strengthened in McAlpin co-authored a paper in 2013 with another well-known Dravidian linguist and an expert in Indo-European languages, Professor Franklin C. Southworth. And this is what they said in their 2013 paper. Mind you, this 2013 paper is also before the recent genetic discovery of the link between Zagros region and the Harappan civilization. This is what they said in 2013. Thus, we may posit as a starting point that the Proto-Dravidian community probably moved from somewhere in the south of present-day Iran. What is noteworthy is that the paper came out, as I said, full 5 years before the ancient DNA evidence. The paper goes on to list the similarities between the two languages. My book goes into detail in some of them. I will just mention a few of the words and similarities that the book, that their study says. These are words related to goat, and mind you, the people who arrived from Zagros are supposed to have been pastoralists. Goat and pastoralism is a very important word. And the earliest words in Dravidian languages that are common to all Dravidian languages are words that have to do with pastoral situations. Goat and goat-related words. Elamite, Hidu, meaning goat. Tamil, Idai, herdsman. Malayalam, Idayan. Day-related words. Elamite, Na. Proto-Dravidian, Nal. Malayalam, you already know Nal. Grinding, Elamite, Umi, husk. Telugu, Umaka, Malayalam, Umi. Inside or interior, Elamite, Uli, Ulhi. Tamil, Ullam, Malayalam, Ulil, inside. So what we are seeing is that there are a lot more words, root words that the book talks about. So what we are seeing is that three very different disciplines, archaeology, genetics, and linguistics, arrive at the same conclusion independently without relying on each other. So even though the Harappan script has not been deciphered, the interlocking evidence of archaeology, linguistics, and genetics suggests that a Proto-Dravidian language was spoken in the Harappan civilization, a Proto-Dravidian language that is linked or is or derives ultimately from Proto-Elamite. There is also another striking piece of evidence. This I was really stunned when I came across this. That suggests this. Archaeologists have long known that there were strong links between the Mesopotamian civilization and the Harappan civilization throughout its mature phase. In fact, the archaeological records of Mesopotamia show evidence of the trade links between the West Asian civilization and the Harappans. It is also known that one of the things that Mesopotamia got from the Harappans was sesame. Sesame, and imagine, and the striking finding is that the word for sesame in Dravidian languages and in the then language of Mesopotamia, Akkadian, is the same, Ellu. So that's something that came from the Harappan civilization to Mesopotamia, and the word for that is the same in the Mesopotamia's then language Akkadian and in the Dravidian. So this is the second large prehistoric migration that contributed to making the Indian population, and it came from West Asia around 9,000 years ago. These are some of the Harappan cities, Mohenjo-daro, the most striking one. Tholavira, if you haven't been there, it's an experience visiting just the sheer scale and ambition of those cities. To see anything similar, you have to come back. This was built in 2500 BCE. To see anything similar in size and scope in the Indian archaeological record, you have to come back to the Mauryan times. That is more than 1,000 years later. So that's Tholavira. This Rakhigadi, there's nothing much to see, but this is the village of Rakhigadi as it is today. So we come to the third large migration that formed the Indian population. And that's also a Neolithic farming related migrations, and it came from East Asia. We know this is also from recent genetic evidence that has shown, based on ancient DNA, that there are two, when China took to agriculture from the Chinese farming heartland, two major migrations took place. The first happened through the land route, and it affected all of Southeast Asia. And the language, you can see the language is also common across all that areas. And it's a language family called Austroasiatic language. And that migration reached India, because we do have Austroasiatic languages. These are Khasi and Mundari, spoken by tribals in central India and eastern India. So this is the migration that began from the Chinese agricultural heartland. But you must remember that migrations like this happen. It's not, they migrate, they mix. So it's and these are things that happen over centuries. There's also a second migration that happened from the Chinese agricultural heartland, which took the island hopping route and which went across the Pacific islands to Madagascar, to Philippines. These are Austronesian languages. They do not have a presence to any appreciable extent in India. So that's a migration that did not touch India. So this is the third major migration that is very much a part of the makeup that we are. Now we come to the last migration, which is the one that brought Indo-European language-speaking people who call themselves Arya from the Central Asian steppe region, from around the area today known as Kazakhstan. Before we go into that, one has to make an observation that there are four, my book talks about four migrations that formed the Indian population. Nobody has a problem with three of them. Nobody has raised a problem with out of Africa migrants reaching India. Nobody has a problem with perhaps Dravidian languages being influenced by migrations from West Asia. Nobody has a problem with Khasi and Mundari languages being connected to the languages of Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia. But the moment you say that there is a migration from steppe or Central Asia that brought Indo-European languages to India, there is an explosion, there is sensitivity. So you have to ask, why is there this sensitivity? What is the source of it? Then you realize that this is actually the result of at least two misconceptions. The first misconception is that the Sanskrit idea, Vedic culture, is the foundation, the source of all Indian culture. Now we know this is not true. It is true that the Vedic Sanskrit idea culture is a very prominent, very important part of our culture, but it's not the only one, or it's not the earliest one. The Harappan civilization precedes it. In fact, the Harappan civilization has left a very large mark on our civilization. The way that we build our houses around courtyards. Why do we build it that way? Because that's the way it was built in the Harappan civilizations. The sacredness of the peepal tree, that comes from the Harappan civilization. There are even seals that show the deity within the peepal tree. There are seals that show positions of yogic positions which are today very recognizable. So there are a large number of things in the Harappan civilization which have then become part of our common civilization today. So it is not correct to say that the Arya Vedic Sanskrit culture is the foundational source of all civilization in the country. No, we are a multi-source civilization. The second misconception is that if you say that a version of early Sanskrit came with Indo-Europe, came from Central Asia around 4,000 to 3,000 years ago, then it means that the Vedas and all of those things were imported from elsewhere, and that can't be true. No, it doesn't mean that they were imported. The Vedas were created very much in India, and they are the result of the mixing between people, migrants who came from Central Asia and people who were already here. So it's a creation it was created the result of a cultural mixing, interchange, borrowing, and between different cultures. How do we know this? We know this from the fact that the earliest Sanskrit that we know, which is Rig Vedic Sanskrit, already has something called retroflex consonants, which is ta, da, na, which requires you to twirl your tongue and then strike your palate. And these retroflex consonants, no other Indo-European language has them, not even Persian, which is so close to, which is almost impossible to distinguish from Sanskrit. So how does Sanskrit get retroflex consonants? Because retroflex consonants are almost a constant feature of pre-Aryan languages, many languages in India, including Dravidian. So retroflex consonants in the earliest Sanskrit that we see is a proof of the fact that that's an influence that when the migrants came in, that it's the local language had an influence on the way the earlier Sanskrit is spoken. So both these, so this is why the sensitivity over this is unnecessary, and all of the world, all of the large population groups in the world are mixtures caused by multiple migrations, as we have seen, and there's nothing particularly upsetting, shouldn't be, about migrations. But how exactly do we know? I said that there was such a migration, but how exactly do we know that there was a migration from Central Asian steppe around between 4,000 and 3,000 years ago? As usual, recent genetic research based on ancient DNA has provided the finishing touch. But these research findings tally well with earlier research based on DNA of currently living populations, as well as research on other disciplines, particularly linguistics. There's one particularly fascinating piece of evidence. For example, it has been well known, well accepted, that Indo-European languages are the largest family of languages in the world, and they are spread from Iceland in the west to India at the other end. 40% of the world's population today speaks an Indo-European language such as English, Hindi, Spanish, Portuguese, Iranian, Russian, or German. 2/3 of the Indians speak an Indo-European language, from Hindi to Bengali to Punjabi to Marathi. The Indian subcontinent forms the easternmost border, easternmost limit of the Indo-European language family range. There are no large population groups to the east of India that speak an Indo-European language. So how did this particular family of languages become the dominant family in India? And how did, there are only two options, and this applies to any country where Indo-European language is spoken. There are only two options, right? Either that language arose there and then spread elsewhere, or the language came from elsewhere. Now, if the language spread from India to the rest of the world, then one would expect to see a fair sprinkling of the genetic signature of the first Indians. Because remember, they have been here for 65,000 years, and they are in all parts of the world, or all parts of the subcontinent. And we even know that the Harappan civilization was built by a mixed population of first Indians and West Asians. So if there was a language spread from India to the rest of the world, we should see a fair sprinkling of the genetic signature of the first Indians all the way from India to Eastern Europe to Western Europe and Iceland. But is there such a signature? No. The first Indian ancestry today has no close relatives outside of South Asia, because even those who left to to populate East Asia, Australia, etc., as we said, that That separation happened tens of thousands of years ago. We can no longer consider them close relatives. So the South Asian, the first Indian ancestry in the South Asian, in South Asia has no close relatives outside of South Asia. But there is one exception to this rule, and that proves the point. What is this one exception? There's one South Asian ancestry that you will find outside India, and that's the community called Roma, or who were earlier called Gypsy. Genetic studies have confirmed that they come from a single ethnic group that left northwestern India, the regions of Punjab, Sindh, Rajasthan, and Haryana, some 1,500 years ago. Long after, by 1,500 years ago, Indo-European languages are already spread all across Europe, because it's only 500 BC. Much before that, Indo-European languages spread had happened. So, long after the Indo-European languages have become established in Europe and elsewhere, so as they migrated west from India, did the Roma carry the genetic signature of the first Indians? Yes, they did. Genetic studies, recent genetic studies say that the Roma carry what's called the mtDNA, or the mitochondrial DNA which is the haplogroups, which is the DNA signature that captures descent through the maternal line, that are completely identified with the first Indian ancestry. So when there is actually a westward migration of an Indian group, it does carry a first Indian ancestry that is visible today in genetic studies. That there is no other such signature suggests that there was no migration from India that spread Indo-European languages outside. Though this circumstantial evidence was given a boost last year when a new paper co-authored by 92 scientists from around the world and using ancient DNA from Central Asia and South Asia arrived at a clear conclusion. The study said that until around 2100 BCE, you cannot see, there is no evidence of Central Asian steppe ancestry in the Indus periphery or in regions surrounding it. But after 1000, after that period, you begin to see such ancestry. So the study said that there was a southward migration of pastoralists from the Kazakh steppe, first towards southern Central Asian regions such as Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, and Tajikistan after 2100 BCE, and then towards South Asia through the second millennium BCE, that's between 2000 and 1000 BCE. The study that details the steppe migrations into India also meshes well with earlier studies that detailed steppe migrations into Europe that changed the European demography, as we heard earlier, about 1,000 years earlier. So the same steppe migrations to Europe that changed European demography happened 1,000 years before the steppe migrations to India reached South Asia. In other words, genetic studies based on ancient DNA say that Central Asian steppe groups migrated both towards west into Europe and towards the west and towards the east and south, including into South Asia, thus giving Indo-European languages the kind of spread that we see today, from Iceland in the west to India in the east. But the story of our demography and our population structure does not end with the arrivals of the migrants. It only begins with it. What happened after they arrived? How did they get to have the current regional linguistic and ethnic how did we get to have the current regional linguistic and ethnic composition that we have today? We need two keys to answer that question. The first key deals with the period from 2000 BCE to 100 CE. The second key deals with the period from 100 CE to where we are today. And these are two distinct periods in terms of understanding our demography, as we will see. Let's try and understand the first period from 2000 BCE to 100 CE, to around nearly 2000 years. If anyone were to ask you what's the most tumultuous period in the history of India, there should be no doubt in pointing out, there should be no hesitation in pointing out that this is the most tumultuous period in Indian history, 2000 BCE to 100 CE. Why is that? Think of all that happened. The Harappan civilization, the largest in the world, falls apart because of a long drought after surviving for 700 years in its mature form. 700 years, the largest in the world. So that slowly disintegrates. The cities go into decay, and people move in search of new livelihood, new lifestyle, towards the east into North India, and towards the south into South India. That's the first. Then again around the same time, new migrants come in with new languages and new agricultural practices from East Asia. And it doesn't stop there. Steppe pastoralists arrive with new language, mastery over horses, and more warlike, and they establish dominance in North India. And there's a language shift that happens in North India from pre-Aryan languages to Indo-European languages. This is the period that sees population, geneticists say, this is proven by geneticists, this is the period that sees population mixing of the kind never seen before or after. We can see this is not normally known, because we think that caste system began with the arrival of the idea, but this is not true. There's 2,000 years of mixing that happened. That mixed all the four population groups who were already in. By 2000 BCE, all the four major components of Indian population are already in. The out of Africa migrants are in, the West Asian farmers are in, the East Asian farmers are in, and the steppe pastoralists are in. These are the four major components of Indian population. And what happens over 2,000 years that follows is mixing. That leaves no one untouched. Today, if you take the DNA of any population group, no matter how remote a region it inhabits, you will see that it is mixed in some form or proportion between these four migrations that happened. So that's the period, the first period. So what happened in the second period? That's equally interesting. This is also a genetic finding. Geneticists say that mixing came to an end. Mixing came to an end. So that's since, and endogamy started, which is the practice of marrying within your own community and not marrying outside, which is the distinguishing mark of the caste system. So it is reasonable to assume that around 100 CE is when the caste system falls around the ankles of Indian society. And now we know that this did not happen with the arrival of the idea. This happened almost 2,000 years later. It's possible that ideas of purity or were there in a limited and a small segment of the population before that, but as a practice that affected almost all of the society, it begins only around 100 CE. So you have to see that as really a political development more than a scriptural development or a religious development. And I think we do not have as yet enough insight, historical insight into what really happened around that period for this to happen. I think more research needs to happen. But I have given some indications in my book about lines in which to think. If you see that there is a political change that happened around 100 CE, that actually changed the direction in which we are moving and pushed things back. So the clear indication is that the caste system was not inevitable. That's not the direction in which we were moving. So, so this was a setback. Now today we know so 2,000 years of mixing, almost 2,000 years of no mixing or endogamy, and this has left a mark on our genetic structure as well. Geneticists say that the genetic differences between people in an Indian village, in the same Indian village, is 2 to 3 times the difference between North Europeans and South Europeans. That's stunning. And that's the result of no intermixing. This is a quotation by David Reich, who led the research based on ancient DNA. of Harvard University, people tend to think India, with its more than 1.3 billion people, as having a tremendously large population. This is an incorrect way, but genetically this is an incorrect way to view that situation. The Han Chinese are truly a large population. They have been mixing freely for thousands of years. In contrast, there are few, if any, Indian groups that are demographically very large. The truth is that India is composed of a very large number of small populations. So this is one way to look at and understand Indian population structure and demography. Four prehistoric migrations that provided the moving parts or the basic components, a 2,000-year period of mixing that ensured that almost all population groups in the country are a combination of these four components in different proportions. And then a 2,000-year period of genetic segregation or endogamy that has created a large number of small populations. There's also another more visual method of, that helps us understand the Indian population structure. And that's the metaphor of the Indian demographic pizza, where the base is the ancestry of the first Indians, the descendants of the original out of Africa migrants who reached here almost 65,000 years ago. And this is new, this is important. This is not something that we knew earlier. It's now clear that, that the ancestry of the first Indians constitutes 50 to 65% of the ancestry of most Indian population groups today. And this is the most substantive part of the Indian or South Asian ancestry. It's the most distinctive part because it has no close relatives outside. Without this base, there's no Indian demographic pizza. You could also say that the edges of the pizza are somewhat thin. That's because eastern and western borders of India have been seen repeated mass migrations over the years, that they have led to a comparatively larger extent replaced the first Indian ancestry. But otherwise, broadly, the base of the Indian demographic pizza is the first Indian ancestry. Why is this important? Because we used to ask, where are the first Indians? Where can we find them? Now we know the answer is look in the mirror. We all carry the first Indian ancestry. We only have to look around. We only have to look into the mirror to see where the first Indian ancestry is. On top of this base comes the source. Who are the source? The source is the Harappans. Why so? Because once the Harappan civilization declined, they moved all across both to North India and South India, carrying their culture, their languages, the practices with them. And in fact, they have become, therefore, the ancestors of both North Indians and South Indians. So the Harappans are the pizza, are the sauce that has spread over the pizza. That's the first Indian ancestry. The language survives in South India, the Dravidian languages, spoken by a fifth of Indians today. And in many ways, it would be correct to say that it is the Harappans who are the glue, the cultural glue that holds us together, because the practices that they perfected in the crucible of the Harappan civilization have been carried to all parts of India. The cheese, the idea, spread all over India, but more in, they are not equally spread. They spread more in the south than elsewhere. So this is the cheese, and the toppings are all the other migrations, including, most important of them, the Austroasiatic ones, and the Huns, the Greeks, the Sakas, the Arabs, the Mughals, a whole lot of them. Most of them left very large, except the Austroasiatic one, which left a large mark. Most of the others left very little mark on our demography, though some of them may have left a very large mark on our culturally. Their demographic impact has been very little. So that's about as much as we can say about the way our population is structured and distributed based on current findings. Very broadly, one can expect the eastern parts of the country to carry relatively more East Asian ancestry, the northern and western parts of India to carry more West Eurasian ancestry, and the southern parts of India to carry comparatively more First Indian ancestry. But what are the implications of this for us as Indians? In what way does it or should it change the way we see ourselves and each other? There are many things that are now clear. These are 7 of the most important ones in my opinion. We Indians are formed mostly out of 4 major prehistoric migrations. The First Indians, the West Asians, the East Asians, and the Arya. Our culture and our civilization reflects this mix. We are a multi-source civilization, not a single-source one. Most population groups in India today carry over 50% of their ancestry from First Indians. And this is important. No matter what language you speak, no matter what caste you belong to, and no matter what religion you belong, you carry a First Indian ancestry. The Arya Sanskrit Vedic culture is one of the important constituents of the civilization that we have together today, that we have in common, that we hold in common today. But it is not the only one or even the earliest one. The Harappan civilization precedes it by far. When their civilization declined, the Harappans spread to both North India and South India, thus becoming the ancestors of both. The culture they spread in both regions in many ways the glue that holds us, the cultural glue that holds us together. The tribals, this is important. The tribals are not very different from the rest of the Indian population. This is important because very often people see them as somehow very different from the rest of the population. All of the rest of the population shares the maximum genetic ancestry with the tribals. The tribals are us in inverted commas. This is a new realization that has to dawn. The caste system did not originate with the arrival of the Arya. It fell in place almost 2000 years later. It has to be seen as a political development that had and has no real rational basis. It should be reason enough for it to be uprooted. But the most important lesson of all this is we are all migrants and we are all mixed. The genius of India is that it has created a unique, highly influential civilization out of the disparate streams that flowed into it at different times in its long history. The sources of our common culture, therefore, are many and not singular. Before I end, I would like to talk about how this diversity plays out in reality, in ways that we often do not fully understand. For example, everyone knows that the eating habits of Indians differ significantly from region to region. It is clear that North Indians and Western Indians consume far more milk and milk products and far less meat and fish than East Indians or South Indians. Politicians and commentators often look at these differences as socio-political in nature. But these have a more foundational reason, genes. Or more specifically, a gene mutation called 13910T, which originated in Europe some 7,500 years ago. This gene allows the human body to digest milk beyond infancy into adulthood. Homo sapiens are perhaps the only mammals in the world who have acquired this ability. This is not surprising because until humans figured out they could keep cattle or goats and exploit them for milk, such a mutation would have been unnecessary and not gainful. But once they started domesticating animals, the ability to digest milk as adults would have become tremendously useful, and a mutated gene that fit the bill was selected over time by evolution. The ability to digest milk even into adulthood evolved more than once. It's not that it evolved in only one place once. It evolved in multiple places more than once, in 4 different areas of the world. But the European mutation, 13910T, is of particular interest to us because most Indians who have the ability to consume milk as adults carry this European version. A countrywide screening of DNA samples from all major language groups and regions of India to answer questions about lactose persistence, which is the technical term for the ability to digest milk after infancy, came to many interesting conclusions, 3 of which are as follows. First, its distribution in India follows a general northwest to southeast declining pattern. Second, the mutation is identical to the European one. Third, only about a fifth of Indians can digest milk into adulthood, with people in western and northern India being the most likely to do so. Even then, the frequency in western and northern India is only 40%. In 40% in northern India, in certain parts of western and northern India, to less than 1% in parts of northeast India. So that's the level of difference in how this gene is distributed. So this finally clarifies why East Indians or South Indians drink far less milk than North and West Indians. As adults, many of them are unable to digest it. It bears repeating that children can consume milk whether they have the gene or not, because all mammals, including humans, children can drink milk. The difference between those who have the gene and those who do not have it is that while those with the gene can go on drinking and digesting the milk for the rest of their lives, others will lose this ability between their first year and adulthood. What has it got to do with vegetarianism or the eating habits or the relative difference in consumption of meat and fish between North and West on the one hand and South and East on the other? It's simply this: the ability to digest milk as adults gives those Indians with the gene mutation an option to substitute milk for meat or fish as a source of animal protein, which many of them seem to have taken, which some of them seem to have taken. This is borne out by surveys of household consumer expenditure carried out by the National Sample Survey. The figures show that by and large, states consuming a lot more milk consume a lot less meat, fish, and eggs, while states consuming a lot more meat, fish, and eggs consume a lot less milk. Clearly, there's a trade-off happening between milk and meat, depending on the presence or absence of the gene mutation. Please also note that the regions consuming more milk and less meat are precisely those with greater prevalence of the gene mutation and vice versa. What the gene story, I went into such detail on the gene story to tell us, not because this particular instance is important, but to tell us that there are good reasons behind the patterns we see in India's sociological map and for the differing answers given to common questions of our civilization, including what to eat and what not to eat. To try to erase those differences and patterns to create a monoculture would be a typically un-Indian enterprise, prone to mishaps and doomed to failure. We live in a geographical region that can be termed a common conversational area. The topics of our intellectual and cultural discussion, debates, and disputes are uniquely our own, and has been for many thousands of years. But we do not have a consensual set of answers. Our answers depend on the historical experiences that different groups among us carry. We Indians have lived through the same history too, but we have experienced some of it from different ends. The differences in political or even eating differences between southern and eastern India on the one hand offer a way for us to understand why we are different in so many ways, without those differences standing in the way of a sense of shared history. Any consumption of our nationhood that doesn't take into account our unity in diversity will be doing a disservice to one of the greatest civilizations the world has seen. And there are examples to it. As I said, what we are seeing today is probably an aberration of trying to straitjacket everything into a monoculture. Is an aberration that we see today. That's not the way that we have been. And the best examples, when we look back, come, for example, from when the Buddhist missionaries first carried India's cultural ethos beyond our borders to China, Southeast Asia, and Central Asia. It was driven by a missionary zeal that is global and all-encompassing, without discrimination of caste, creed, or race. It's the first missionary region in the world which felt the burning desire to share its message of compassion with all humans, irrespective of any imaginable border, whether man-made or nature-made. It drew its principles and practices from all parts of India's previous history, including that of the Arya, even while challenging ritual, sacrificial practices, and ideas of hierarchy. It was therefore natural that Buddhism became the first philosophy in the world that felt the burning desire to share the insights and message of compassion. The Buddha's message still flourishes with 488 million adherents around the world. Trying to live up to the principles he enunciated is testimony to the global appeal of a unique Indian philosophy. So the reason why I mentioned this is that the solutions lie in our own history. History has a lot to teach us if we listen carefully and with an open mind. Thank you very much.
കഴിഞ്ഞ ഒരു 1.5 മണിക്കൂറായിട്ട് വസ്തുതകളും വിവരങ്ങളും കൊണ്ട് നമ്മളെ അമ്പരപ്പിക്കുകയായിരുന്നു ശ്രീ ടോണി ജോസഫ്. ഒരുപക്ഷെ ചരിത്രത്തിൻ്റെ ഇരുണ്ട ഇടനാഴികളിലേക്ക് വെളിച്ചം വീശുകയും എന്ന് മാത്രമല്ല ചരിത്രത്തിൻ്റെ മാത്രമല്ല അവരുടെയും മനസ്സുകളിലെ ഇരുണ്ട അറകളിലേക്ക് കൂടി വെളിച്ചം വീശാൻ ശ്രീ ടോണി ജോസഫിൻ്റെ പ്രഭാഷണത്തിനും പുസ്തകത്തിനും കഴിയുമെന്നുറപ്പാണ്. കഴിഞ്ഞ ഏതാണ്ട് 1.25 മണിക്കൂർ നേരത്തെ ഈ പ്രഭാഷണം ശ്രീ ടോണി ജോസഫിന് ഒരു ഉപഹാരം സമർപ്പിക്കുന്നതിനായിട്ട് നമ്മുടെ പ്രശസ്ത ശില്പി ശ്രീ കാനായി കുഞ്ഞിരാമൻ സാറിനെ വേദിയിലേക്ക് ക്ഷണിക്കാം. അടുത്തതായി ഇൻ്ററാക്റ്റീവ് സെഷനാണ്. എല്ലാവരും സജീവമായ ചർച്ചയിൽ പങ്കെടുക്കണം എന്ന് അഭ്യർത്ഥിക്കുന്നു. നേരിട്ട് ചോദിക്കാവുന്നതാണ്, മലയാളത്തിലും ഇംഗ്ലീഷിലും ചോദിക്കാം. അതല്ല, നിങ്ങളുടെ കയ്യിൽ ഒരു ബ്ലാങ്ക് പേപ്പർ തന്നിട്ടുണ്ട്, അതിൽ എഴുതി ചോദിക്കാവുന്നതാണ്. ഒരു 1.5 മണിക്കൂർ വളരെ എത്ര നേരം വേണമെങ്കിലും ആവശ്യത്തിന് സമയം ചർച്ചയ്ക്കായി വെച്ചിരിക്കുകയാണ് സംഘാടകർ. ടോണിയോട് ഈ കിട്ടിയ അവസരം നമ്മൾ പരമാവധി ഉപയോഗപ്പെടുത്തിക്കൊണ്ട് ശ്രീ ടോണിയുമായുള്ള ഒരു സംവാദമാകാം, ചർച്ചയാകാം, ചോദ്യോത്തരമാകാം. എല്ലാവരെയും വളരെ സ്നേഹത്തോടു കൂടി ക്ഷണിക്കും. ഇത് മോഡറേറ്റ് ചെയ്യുന്നത് ശ്രീ ജോണിയും ഡോക്ടർ സന്തോഷ് കുമാറുമാണ്.
സാധാരണ നമ്മുടെ പിൻഡോ പ്രഭാഷണം കഴിഞ്ഞിട്ട് ഇങ്ങനൊരു ചർച്ച നമ്മൾ വെക്കാറില്ല. ആദ്യത്തെ പ്രാവശ്യമാണ് ഇങ്ങനൊരു ചർച്ച നമ്മൾ നടത്തുന്നത്. മാത്രമല്ല, ഈ ഒരു ചർച്ചയുടെ പ്രാധാന്യം വെച്ച് കഴിഞ്ഞാൽ 1.5 മണിക്കൂർ സമയം ഈ ചർച്ചയ്ക്ക് വേണ്ടിയിട്ട്, പ്രഭാഷണത്തിൻ്റെ ഒപ്പം തന്നെയുള്ള സമയം ഈ ചർച്ചയ്ക്ക് വേണ്ടിയിട്ട് നീക്കി വെച്ചിട്ടുണ്ട്. 2 രീതിയിൽ ചോദിക്കാം. ചോദ്യം ചോദിക്കാൻ പറ്റുന്നവർ എഴുന്നേറ്റ് നിന്ന് ചോദിക്കാം, മൈക്ക് തരുന്നതാണ്. രണ്ടാമത്, ചോദ്യം ചോദിക്കാൻ പറ്റാത്തവർ പേപ്പറിൽ എഴുതി തന്നു കഴിഞ്ഞാൽ സിമിലറായിട്ടുള്ള ചോദ്യങ്ങൾ ഒരുമിച്ച് ഞങ്ങൾ ചോദിക്കാം. അല്ലാത്ത ഈ പറഞ്ഞ വളരെ വ്യത്യസ്തമാണെങ്കിൽ അത് നേരിട്ട് തന്നെ ചോദിക്കാം. ഇതാണ് ഈ ചർച്ചയുടെ ഒരു രീതി. ചോദ്യങ്ങൾ ചോദിച്ചു തുടങ്ങാം. തുടക്കം നിലയിൽ ഞാൻ തന്നെ ഒരു ചോദിക്കാനൊരു ബുദ്ധിമുട്ടുണ്ടെങ്കിൽ 2 ചോദ്യങ്ങളാണ് പ്രധാന എനിക്ക് പോരുന്നത്. ഒന്ന്, താങ്കൾ പറഞ്ഞ ഹാരപ്പൻ സിവിലൈസേഷൻ്റെ അതൊരു വലിയൊരു സിവിലൈസേഷൻ ആയിരുന്നു നമുക്കറിയാം. ആ സിവിലൈസേഷൻ ഡിസ്പേഴ്സ് ചെയ്ത് കഴിഞ്ഞിട്ട് പോയിട്ട് പിന്നെ എന്തുകൊണ്ട് അതായത് അവർ അക്രോസ് ഇന്ത്യ പോയിരിക്കുകയാണെന്നാണ് നമ്മൾ അറിയുന്നത്. മുഴുവൻ എല്ലാ സ്ഥലങ്ങളിലും എത്തിയിട്ടുണ്ട്. എന്തുകൊണ്ട് ആ സിവിലൈസേഷൻ വീണ്ടും വേറൊരു നാഗരികത മറ്റ് സ്ഥലങ്ങളിൽ ഉണ്ടാക്കിയില്ല എന്നുള്ളത്. അവിടെ മാത്രമായിട്ട് അത് ഒരു നഗരം ഉണ്ടാക്കാൻ അറിയുന്നവർ തീർച്ചയായിട്ടും മറ്റു സ്ഥലങ്ങളിൽ പോകുമ്പോൾ വീണ്ടും നഗരം ഉണ്ടാക്കേണ്ടതാണല്ലോ. അവരെന്തുകൊണ്ട് അടുത്ത സ്ഥലങ്ങളിൽ പോയിട്ട് ഇത്രയും അവരുടെ ലാംഗ്വേജ് എല്ലാം സ്പ്രെഡ് ചെയ്തിട്ടും ഇത് അവർ ഈ നഗരങ്ങൾ പിന്നെ ഈ നഗരവൽക്കരണം നടന്നില്ല എന്നുള്ളൊരു ക്വസ്റ്റ്യനാണ് ഒന്ന്. രണ്ടാമത്തെ ക്വസ്റ്റ്യൻ കാസ്റ്റ് സിസ്റ്റത്തെ കുറിച്ച് തന്നെയാണ്. കാസ്റ്റ് സിസ്റ്റത്തിൻ്റെ ഒറിജിൻ നമ്മൾ ഈ പറയുന്ന അതുവരെയുള്ളത് ജനറ്റിക് സ്റ്റഡീസ് കൊണ്ടാണ് നമ്മൾ പ്രൂവ് ചെയ്തിരിക്കുന്നത്. അതായത് എല്ലാം മൈഗ്രേഷൻസ് എങ്ങനെ വന്നിരിക്കുന്നു, എവിടെ വരെ പോയിരിക്കുന്നു എന്നുള്ളത്. ഇപ്പോൾ കാസ്റ്റ് സിസ്റ്റം 100 AD സിയിലാണ് തുടങ്ങുന്നതിനുള്ള ആകെക്കൂടെയുള്ള നമ്മുടെ ഒരു എവിഡൻസ് എന്ന് പറയുന്നത് അതായത് എൻഡോഗമി തുടങ്ങി എന്നുള്ളത് മാത്രമാണ്. അതിനപ്പുറത്തേക്ക് എന്തെങ്കിലും എവിഡൻസ് അതിനുണ്ടോ എന്നുള്ളതാണ് രണ്ടാമത്തെ ക്വസ്റ്റ്യൻ.
I don't know whether I need it. Maybe this is what is. The first question, I think when they moved, you have to look at why the civilization did not come back immediately. You have to see it as two different things. One, as far as people moving to South India are concerned, they are moving into a very different climatic zone. So the same learnings will have to be completely unlearned, because agriculture is the place, is what begins it, right? So even, for example, the same things won't grow. In South India, what we see is a complete different package of domestication of plants that begins with pulses and millets. So this is, so in some senses you are saying that the learnings of the Northwest India would not have been sufficient for South India, and that would take time. Now comes the more interesting question, but what about North India? Now the problem is the only thing that I can suggest is that in North India what happened was Northern India what happened was a culture change. The newly dominant culture was pastoral and was not urban, and this is something that happened in Europe as well. In fact, the result of the first Central Asian migrations into Europe is actually disappearance of settlements. So when this new mobile pastoral form, what shall I say, spread, this was the new lifestyle of the steppe, and that's what they spread both to Europe and into India as well. So as far as the northern part of India is concerned, there was a culture change. And as far as the other parts of the concerned, you need to start from scratch again, because these are different climatic zones and requires very different methods to start up. So that's one answer what one can think of. So that's the first question. The second question was.
The second question was regarding though we know that it's like the caste system developed by 100 AD, the only evidence we speak is like
yes, the only evidence to say that 100 CE is endogamy, and not the other parts. Well, people have then tried to look at what the evidence suggests at 100 CE and like to I think link it with the textual evidence of various kinds that deals with the formation of the ideas of caste hierarchy, etc. But I think we need much more work, which is why I think this is an area that requires far more work. We do not yet have full clarity on what really happened at that time, because the genetic evidence about endogamy is fairly new.
Hello. You want mic? ചോദ്യം മലയാളത്തിൽ വേണമെങ്കിലാകാം, and if you are comfortable with English you can proceed in that.
I prefer to speak in English because it's
welcome.
a little technical. I really enjoyed the talk, and I think I'd read about this book somewhere when it first came out. My question is, I remember seeing a documentary some years ago about this out of Africa migration, and it seems to have come to India, it seems to have gone to Australia, it seems to have gone to America. You know, they walk through, some parts of I mean, now there's water there, but I think they could walk. And they went to the US at that point. So this documentary said that there's one small group of people in Tamil Nadu who have links with the Aboriginal Australians. And but what you were describing, it seems like all of us have a little bit of this left. But that documentary said that there's only this one small community in Tamil Nadu, and they did some very complicated ways of finding. This is about 5, maybe 10 years ago, this documentary came out. So my question is, when this out of Africa migration happened, it simultaneously happened to all these parts, including India. And what are the links between these first out of Africa migrations on different parts of the world? That's one of the things. And when they migrated, did they actually walk, or did they? How did they migrate? And was it groups of people, or was it just women or men, or who were these people? And when they came to India, who did they meet here? Did they meet Neolithic Indians, or what sort of people did they see here?
When they reached India, there are no other modern humans. The only population that is there in India when they reached here are other Homo species. Like we do not yet know whether they were Homo neanderthals, Homo erectus, or Homo heidelbergensis, or Neanderthalensis. We do not know what specific lineage, Homo lineage they belong to. So that's the answer to whom did they meet. They were the first modern humans, the out of Africa migrants. So that's faster. A coastal route also means that you don't have to change your lifestyle too often because you're used to living on marine resources or resources on the, so you're not, it doesn't require you to change or update your life skills all that much all the time. So this is what I would say the majority opinion. It doesn't mean that everybody agrees with it, that they took a coastal route. You also have to remember that what you today see as the seas separating different parts of the world would not have been so all the time. During much of the, during different periods, the distance of separating two parts of, let's say Australia, separating Australia from the rest of the other islands nearby would have been much less than what it is today. And in Sri Lanka during some period would have been connected to us. So you need to look at, in each case you need to look at what period are we looking at as the likely crossing or the arrival of the modern humans. And in some cases it would have involved some amount of travel across or seafaring capability, at least over short distances. I don't know whether I have answered all the...
What about the documentary, which maybe you've not seen it, but...
I'm not fully sure, but I think people do when they say where are the first Indians, they are talking usually about where can we find unmixed unmixed lineage of that first Indians. If they said that they found an unmixed, I don't think that is, if it was done 10 years ago or 15 years ago, you should see that the population genetics is a field that has seen tremendous growth in the last 5 years, both in terms of technology, methodology, the conclusions it derives at, to the extent that whatever one heard 5 years ago, 10 years ago, would not today be taken as that, because our understanding has improved far greater, both because of technology and the methods of analysis that are used. So beyond that, I don't know what to say, but I think it is first Indian ancestry is the dominant ancestry in India. 50 to 60% of most population groups carry the first.
So women did migrate, looking at
65,000 years ago. That's when you say first Indian. First Indian is the term that my book uses for the out of Africa migrants who reached here 65,000 years ago.
Africa also would have been.
That's right. Yeah. That.
That's my question in Malayalam. രണ്ട് ക്വസ്റ്റ്യൻസ് ഉണ്ട്. ഒന്ന്, നമ്മുടെ കേരളത്തിൻ്റെ കാര്യം എടുക്കുമ്പോൾ കേരളത്തിലെ മലനിരകളിലുള്ള ട്രൈബ്സിൽ നെഗ്രിറ്റോസ്, ആസ്ട്രലോയിഡ്സ്, മംഗോൾസ് അത്തരം ശരീരഘടനകളുള്ളവരുണ്ട് എന്നുള്ളത് നമുക്കറിയാം. അത് എന്താണ് ഒരു റിവേഴ്സ് മൈഗ്രേഷൻ ഇത്തരം സ്ഥലങ്ങളിലേക്ക് പോയിട്ട് ഓസ്ട്രേലിയയിൽ നിന്നും മറ്റും കടൽ മാർഗമോ മറ്റോ നമ്മുടെ ഒരു സൈഡിൽ ഈ മലയുടെ മറവും വളരെ എക്സ്പോസ്ഡ് ആയിട്ടുള്ള ഒരു കടൽ തീരമൊക്കെ ഉള്ള ഒരു പശ്ചാത്തലത്തിലാണ് ഞാൻ അങ്ങനെ ചോദിക്കുന്നത്. അങ്ങനെ സംഭവിച്ചിട്ടായിരിക്കുമോ കേരളത്തിൽ ഇത്തരത്തിൽ വ്യത്യാസം വന്നത് എന്നുള്ളതാണ് ഒരു ചോദ്യം. രണ്ടാമത്തേത്, നമ്മുടെ ഈ കാസ്റ്റ് സിസ്റ്റത്തിൻ്റെ ഭാഗമായിട്ട് ഈ സ്വജാതി വിവാഹം എന്നുള്ള സമ്പ്രദായം നിലവിൽ വന്നത് വളരെ ചെറിയൊരു കാലയളവ് കൊണ്ടാണോ അതോ വാസ് ഇറ്റ് എ ലോങ് പ്രോസസ്?
ആദ്യത്തെ ചോദ്യം, I think it is these kind of classifications that were used earlier are no longer used because they were used because of not sufficient understanding. All population groups, nobody does those kind of divisions anymore, like Australoid, Negroid, those were old classifications. Today we know that all population groups are mixtures of ancient population groups, which themselves are mixtures of previous population groups. So there is no such thing as a pure race, and identification and categorization of people into races is problematic. But to your second part of the same question, whether there were complicated movements, whether back migrations, etc. Yes, there have been back migrations to Africa, for example. We talked about out of Africa migrations from out of Africa that reached all of the world. But there has also been, in some cases, we can say that there has been back migration from people outside of Africa into Africa too. And as I said, all through the, we looked at 4 major classes of migrations. But there have been migrations that are happening all the time, right? Across all time and space. The Siddhis, for example, Africans who came here, they are not related to these 4 classes of migrations. So there are migrations and back migrations that happen all the time. That goes without saying. But I would request to stay away from those classifications and try to form associations based on that. The second part was caste system. Genetic evidence suggests that around 100 CE, endogamy becoming the common practice across the country. It doesn't say, well, I would imagine that it's something that happens over a period of time, but we do not have that level of visibility into the process to say how fast was it or how slow was it. From the genetic study, we only know that around 100 CE, this comes endogamy falls into practice. I don't know whether I have answered both. Are you?
ഒരു സെക്കൻഡ്, അല്ലെങ്കിൽ ഞാൻ ഇവിടെ ഇരുന്നു പോകും. എനിക്ക് ചോദിക്കാനുള്ളത്, കാരണം ഈ സമയത്തുണ്ടായ പ്രധാനപ്പെട്ട 2 പുസ്തകങ്ങൾ, ഏറ്റവും രസകരമായ കാര്യം, ഒന്ന് ഒരു ഇസ്രായേലി ഹിസ്റ്റോറിയൻ യുവൽ നോവ ഹരാരിയുടെ സാപ്പിയൻസ്, രണ്ടാമത്തത് താങ്കളുടെ, അപ്പോൾ ഒരാൾ ചരിത്രകാരനും മറ്റൊരാൾ ജേർണലിസ്റ്റ്, താങ്കളെ ഐഡൻറ്റിഫൈ ചെയ്യുന്ന ഏതോ ഒരു റിവ്യൂവിൽ സയൻസ് ജേർണലിസ്റ്റ് എന്ന് പറഞ്ഞിരിക്കുന്നു. ഇതിൽ സാപ്പിയൻസ് നോക്കിക്കഴിഞ്ഞാൽ ഇറ്റ്സ് ഫുൾ ഓഫ് വയലൻസ്. ഹൗ സാപ്പിയൻസ് ഹാവ് ബീൻ സോ വയലൻറ്റ് in decimating so many populations, including the Australian things. And when we come to your book, it is almost sanitized. There is no violence in it. But both these books create almost more or less the same impact. Actually, it changes our perspective, whoever we are. What exactly is or was, or you have been looking at, the impact of these 2 books in the global right wing, which is in the emergent phase today?
I think there is, we know that the world is going through a period of much greater division and otherization of, and an inability to accept differences. What all science does, if you understand it correctly, I think is that it helps you remove your biases and understand facts as they happened. The response to my book from the right wing in India has been predictable, to the extent that it's question the motives is the first response, rather than engage with the facts. But the book has been received very well by the scientific and the academic community, and I think over a period of time, it's a new generation that has to be convinced. I think the people who have made up their minds, it would find it difficult to accept new evidence, as we have seen repeatedly.
Thank you.
Sir, sir. എനിക്കൊരു ക്ലിയർ ആക്കാൻ ഒരു സാധനം, ഒരു സ്പെസിഫിക് പ്ലേസ് ക്ലിയർ ആക്കാൻ വേണ്ടിയുള്ള സംശയമാണ്. ഞാൻ ജനറിക് വായനയിൽ കേട്ടിരുന്നു, കാസ്റ്റ് സിസ്റ്റത്തിൻ്റെ ബേസിക് ഫോമായ 3 ലെവൽ ഡിവിഷൻ, ദ പ്രീസ്റ്റ്, ദ വാരിയർ, ദ പെസൻറ്റ്, അതുതന്നെയാണ് കാസ്റ്റ് സിസ്റ്റത്തിൽ വന്നിട്ടുള്ളത്. ഈ ഡിവിഷൻ ഒറിജിനലി പ്രോട്ടോ ഇൻഡോ യൂറോപ്യൻ സിവിലൈസേഷനിലൊപ്പം ഉണ്ടായിരുന്നെന്നും അതിനകത്ത് നിന്ന് പ്രോട്ടോ ഇൻഡോ യൂറോപ്യൻ സിവിലൈസേഷനിൽ നിന്ന് പോയിട്ടുള്ള ഇന്ത്യൻ സൈഡിലേക്കാണെങ്കിലും ജർമാനിക് സൈഡിലേക്കാണെങ്കിലും രണ്ടിടത്തും ഇതേ സെയിം ടൈപ്പ് ഓഫ് ഡിവിഷൻ, അത് ഇന്ത്യയിൽ വന്നപ്പോൾ അത് കാസ്റ്റ് സിസ്റ്റമായി, അവിടെ അത് എസ്റ്റേറ്റ് സിസ്റ്റമായി, ഈ രീതിയിൽ മാറിയുന്നുമുണ്ട്. അപ്പം പക്ഷെ സാറ് പറഞ്ഞു ഇവിടെ വന്നിട്ട് 2000 വർഷം ഇൻ്റർമിക്സിങ് നടന്ന ശേഷമാണ് പിന്നീട് എന്തോ സോഷ്യോ പൊളിറ്റിക്കൽ സിറ്റുവേഷനിലാണ് കാസ്റ്റ് സിസ്റ്റം ഡെവലപ്പ് ചെയ്തിട്ടുണ്ടാവും, എൻഡോഗമി വരികയും പിന്നീട് ഈ കാസ്റ്റ് എന്നുള്ള രീതിയിലാവുകയും ചെയ്തു എന്ന് പറഞ്ഞു. അപ്പോൾ അതൊന്ന് എന്തുകൊണ്ടാണെന്ന് ക്ലിയർ ആക്കാമോ?
To have I think that a very great distinguishing feature of the caste system is endogamy. Without endogamy, I would say there is no caste system. I am not sure that other castes, other systems of classification and hierarchy follow the same principles of strict endogamy. Right? You can have a 3-class system where people are, but which doesn't outright ban, or it militates against endogamy. Now, there could have been a class system and a hierarchy even before 100 CE, but there need not have been. And in fact, if you look at the Indian earliest text, the Rig Veda, you would not find, with the exception of the Purusha Sukta, which is in Mandala 10, you will not find much evidence of a strong caste system or strict bans against mixing. All that are creations of later time. All of this to me suggests that at least a good part of the migrants that who came in were not votaries of ideas of purity and separateness. So my book actually talks about, gives a few indications on how to avoid some common pitfalls. The first pitfall is that we usually think of the Arya migration in particular as one monolithic group of people who came together at one point of time and, and dominated the region. I think that's highly unlikely. What it is likely is a period of migration that continued for centuries, that involved multiple groups, and who were often at war with each other, and who are not of similar mind. And it grows into great detail into, for example, we know that people in the Aryavarta thought about others outside of Aryavarta, and Aryavarta ends at the confluence of Ganga and Yamuna. So a lot of parts in Magadha, what used to be called Magadha, would be outside of Aryavarta. And people in Aryavarta thought of them as barbarians, Mlechas. And if a good person from the Aryavarta went to those regions and came back, he had to undergo all kinds of rituals to get back into society. Now, you would think, but please remember that what is Magadha is also Indo-European, right? So it is not as if, so even in the Indo-European language area, or both people call themselves Aryans. But those in the Aryavarta consider those Aryans not Aryans, but Mlechas. What that should suggest to you is that there are different groups of migrating groups who had very different approaches to how society should be organized, and very different ideas about mixing or language use. So to answer your question is that it's possible that there were some groups who had ideas of much higher degree of awareness about purity, and what shall I say, ideas of hierarchy and purity, and many other groups of the Arya community who did not think so. What happened in 100 CE has to be seen as a political struggle in which the more conservative side won and succeeded in shaping society in the way that it thought society should be organized. And there is a new ideology of hierarchy that was successfully communicated, and most people bought in. And I think the buying in was as important as the selling of it. But that's a different story.
Thank you, sir.
സർ, ഞാൻ ചോദിക്കാനിരുന്ന ഒരു ചോദ്യമാണ് ഏകദേശം പുള്ളി ചോദിച്ചത്. എന്നാലും ഒന്നുകൂടി ഒരു ക്ലാരിറ്റിക്ക് വേണ്ടിയിട്ട്, ഓൾമോസ്റ്റ് 1500 BC തൊട്ടാണല്ലോ ഈ ഹാരപ്പൻ സിവിലൈസേഷൻ്റെ എൻഡ് ആവുന്നതും അടുത്ത ഇത് തുടങ്ങുന്നതും. അപ്പോൾ ആ സമയത്തുള്ള ലിറ്ററേച്ചറിൽ തന്നെ ഈ കാസ്റ്റ് സിസ്റ്റം എവിഡൻ്റ് അല്ലേ ശരിക്കും പറഞ്ഞാൽ വേദാസിലൊക്കെ?
Not in the earliest Rig Veda. Rig Veda, there is a Purusha Sukta which talks about, it's in Mandala 10, which talks about, the Brahmin comes from the, etc. The Shudra comes from the feet, etc. It's called Purusha Sukta. That is often used as the Vedic sanction for a caste system. But it's generally accepted that Mandala 10 is one of the latest parts of the Rig Veda, and it's possible that it was even interpolated later. So I think the weight of evidence is that the most of the Aryans, I'm not saying there were not groups within them who were of a different kind, but most of the Aryans who came in may not have had a strong racial approach to mixing, because even when you look at there are fights between them, and many of the rishis that are there in the Rig Veda, they are born not from from what you would today later that the text would consider lower caste. So you do not see such. So this is a development that happened later to the extent that I have understood it. As I said, this is not an issue that I have gone into it in depth, because my book mostly ends with the arrival of the Arya, and this part, all that we discuss, comes in the epilogue, where I say these are things that are yet to be researched more. So my comments on this part are merely as indicative of what lines we could start thinking about. But the research on this is yet to be done.
Just one more question, sir. Sir, നമുക്കിപ്പം ഹാരപ്പൻ സിവിലൈസേഷൻ്റെ ഒക്കെ ഉള്ള റിമൈൻസ് എല്ലാം നമുക്ക് കിട്ടിയിട്ടുണ്ട്. പക്ഷെ അതിനുശേഷം വന്ന ഈ ഒരു വേദിക് പീരീഡിൽ അതിൻ്റെ റിമൈൻസ് നമുക്ക് കിട്ടിയിട്ടുണ്ടോ?
Because it was not settlement friendly. You have remains because it's a civilization that is building cities. But what followed after that was a pastoral lifestyle, a mobile lifestyle, during which settlements disappeared.
But we had literature.
You had literature, yes. We had compositions, yeah. That is true. So how does that change? The point is that there is a new mobile lifestyle that came into being, not just in India. The same thing happened in the steppe. My book talks about how the disappearance of settlements in the steppe, in parts where there were agricultural settlements earlier, once the Yamnaya, which is the group that moved into Western Europe, the actual disappearance of settlements. And in fact, in the earliest Vedic text, you will see mentions about keep moving, don't stay in villages. So this is a pastoral lifestyle that became the fashion, not just in India, as I said, even in other areas in Europe where they moved to. Settlements disappeared for a long time. So how far it took for it to come back, and ultimately it does come back. That again, these are parts which we do not have full answers to. But the disappearance per se is not a surprise.
About the migrations, actually you characterized 4 stages. I rightly agree with that. But I was wondering whether you missed in archaeology what we call as a Iron Age,
Yeah,
which was important in terms of the dissemination of the population.
yeah.
അത് കേരളത്തിൻ്റെയും ഇന്ത്യയുടെയും കാര്യത്തിൽ വളരെ വ്യക്തമാണ്. ആ കാലഘട്ടത്തിലാണ് പ്രത്യേകിച്ച് ഇപ്പം പട്ടണം പോലെയുള്ളൊരു എക്സ്കവേഷൻ പുറത്തു കൊണ്ടുവന്നൊരു സത്യം, ഏതാണ്ട് 2000 വർഷം മുമ്പ് ഈ പ്രദേശം ലോകത്തിൻ്റെ എല്ലാ ഭാഗങ്ങളുമായിട്ട് വളരെ ബ്രിസ്കായിട്ടുള്ള എൻഗേജ്മെൻറ്റിൽ ഏർപ്പെട്ടിരുന്നു.
അതെ.
അവിടെ നിന്നുള്ള ഏൻഷ്യൻ്റ് DNA പഠനങ്ങൾ കാണിക്കുന്നത് ഈ താങ്കൾ പറഞ്ഞ രീതിയിലുള്ള ഒരു അഡ്മിക്സിങ് വലിയ തോതിൽ ഇവിടെ നിന്ന് ചെറിയ സൂചനയുള്ളൂ. 12 സാമ്പിൾസേ നമ്മൾ ചെയ്തിട്ടുള്ളൂ. അപ്പോൾ അതുകൊണ്ട് ഈ പീരീഡ്, ബട്ട് ഇൻ ദ ഓവറോൾ ചേർണിങ് യു സെഡ് ദിസ് പീരീഡ് 2000 ഓൾസോ ഈസ് കമ്മിങ് ഇൻ ടു ഇറ്റ്. ബട്ട് ടു മീ iron was the kind of manipulator that turned everything upside down, probably after Neolithic and Chalcolithic, in terms of the population dissemination. രണ്ടാമത്തെ ഒരു ചോദ്യം കൂടെ കാസ്റ്റ് സിസ്റ്റം. എനിക്ക് തോന്നുന്നു ഈ ജനറ്റിക്കിൽ ഉണ്ടാകാൻ പോകുന്ന വലിയ വിപ്ലവം അത് നിങ്ങളെങ്ങനെ കാണുന്നു എന്ന് തമാശയ്ക്ക് വേണ്ടി ചോദിക്കണമെന്ന് വിചാരിച്ചു. കാരണം ഈ ജാതി സമ്പ്രദായം എന്ന ലോകത്തെ ഏറ്റവും ക്രൂരമായ സാമൂഹ്യ അവസ്ഥ നമുക്ക് ഇതുവരെ അതിൻ്റെ എങ്ങും തൊടാൻ പറ്റിയിട്ടില്ല. പക്ഷേ അതിനെ ഇപ്പം ഈ ജനറ്റിക് ഇൻ്റർവെൻഷൻ വലിയ തോതിൽ എക്സ്പോസ് ചെയ്യാൻ സാധ്യതയുണ്ട്. അങ്ങനെയെങ്കിൽ പറയുമ്പോൾ പോലും ഈ സൗത്ത് ഇന്ത്യ പ്രത്യേകിച്ചൊരു എക്സെപ്ഷൻ ഉണ്ട് എന്ന് സംശയം തോന്നുന്നു. ഇപ്പം പട്ടണത്തിൽ നിന്ന് കണ്ട സൂചനകളൊക്കെ പറയുന്നത് നിങ്ങൾ വളരെ ബോധപൂർവം പറഞ്ഞു നിർത്തിയ ബുദ്ധിസത്തിൻ്റെ ഒരു അടിസ്ഥാനമാണ് തെക്കേ ഇന്ത്യയിൽ വ്യക്തമായി ഈ ജൈന ബൗദ്ധ പാരമ്പര്യത്തിൻ്റെതാണ് കാണുന്നത്. അപ്പോൾ ഈ 100 AD കാസ്റ്റ് സിസ്റ്റം വന്നു എന്ന് ഒരു ഇന്ത്യൻ സബ് കോണ്ടിനെൻറ്റിനെ മുൻനിർത്തി സംസാരിക്കുന്നത് അത്ര കണ്ട് ശരിയാണോ? പ്രത്യേകിച്ച് കേരളത്തിൻ്റെ ഒരു സാഹചര്യത്തിൽ നമ്മളിപ്പോൾ കേരളത്തിലിരുന്നാണല്ലോ സംസാരിക്കുന്നത്. ഒരു 1000 AD മാത്രമേ യഥാർത്ഥത്തിൽ ഈ ജാതി വ്യവസ്ഥ ഇവിടെ ശക്തമായിട്ടുള്ളൂ. അത് നമ്മുടെ ബോധമണ്ഡലത്തിൽ നിന്ന് പോയൊരു കാര്യമാണ്. സോ ഹൗ യു എൻഗേജ് ദീസ് ടു കൈൻഡ് ഓഫ്?
I think both are very absolutely valid points. Thank you. Yeah, sure. Oh. So, one by one. I think both the points are very valid, and the Iron Age is not something that, it's something that I would. It definitely led to significant. It's a significant moment in the history. Whether it led to population movements of the kind that other things that one will have to look at. It's clear that for example, that the expansion of agriculture from the western parts of North India into the eastern parts to a large extent happened after the Iron Age. But yeah, you have a valid point. But to what extent did it change populations as much as it did in the other mentions? I think it is something that we'll have to look at. The second part about caste system, absolutely right. I agree with you. It couldn't have been 100 CE would be perhaps too early a period to look at caste system being there in Kerala. Would it have been would it have been too early for regions that are in Karnataka or Tamil Nadu or we need? So I'm saying, if you look at what genetic evidence suggests, there may have exceptions in terms of regions, but it suggests is a significant step change around that period to a very large part. There is also another report that suggests that it is not 100 CE that happened, that actually changes the period of when the endogamy starts to around 2 centuries or 3 centuries later during the Gupta period, which is also a genetic paper that came out later than the first one, which suggested 100 CE. Now, somewhere around that time, I think we see a step change in terms of society accepting endogamy and caste distinctions as a good way to organize society, as we see also in the epics that become prominent, as we see in the Dharma Shastras. Many of them were written during this period. So I think it is probably correct to see that period as being a period when caste system falls into place, not across all regions of India, but during through a major part of India, it falls into place. That might be the better way to look at the data, I think.
Sir, you are focusing on mainly on prehistoric migrations.
That's right.
My question is regarding what about the diasporic diffusion, the present status, because lot of diaspora in the diaspora going to US, and is it like the migratory birds triggering invasive alien species like scenario? My second question is regarding whether the Lakshadweep Sentinelese genome is, what is the reason for its insulation? The Sentinelese genome is still insulated from the mainland.
Yeah.
And the other one regarding your PISA metaphor, please elaborate on it, and the trade-off between meat and milk. These are the questions. Meat and milk.
Meat and milk.
Trade-off.
Okay, I will start with the last one first. Meat and milk, I was merely saying that there is a genetic mutation that allows some adults, 1/3 of adults in the global, if you look at the global population, but far less in India, which allows human adults to digest milk. Not everybody has it. From the Indian evidence of eating habits, we also know that where there is a gene that allows Indian adults to drink milk that is in more abundance, such as in northern and western India, people do drink a lot more milk and eat far less meat and fish. So in terms of animal protein, there's a substitution that seems to have happened between milk and fish and meat. And we see absolutely the opposite in northeastern India and South India, where there is the prevalence of the gene is far less, and therefore people drink far less milk but eat more fish and meat. So the relative preference between these two food groups seems to be influenced by the presence or absence of the gene. That was what I was talking about. What was the other? What was the earlier question? The Sentinelese, yes, there seem to be almost all of the Andaman Nicobar population groups have, right now they are all very severely mixed. They're no longer as as unmixed as earlier. Sentinelese is probably one of the last groups that has remained separate and very fiercely so. And but we have not. There has been no genetic study of them for us to say anything at all. Pardon? But I didn't understand the question though. What were you saying, Indian diaspora? Yeah.
After the Aryan migration, there has been a lot of mixing.
Yes.
And what sort of people, if you say like yearly, you can say that the Aryan population was mainly concerned in North India. Is it that they have, now we have everything now in South India also? How sort of genetic mixing has happened after the fourth migration?
I do not think we have sufficient data to look at in terms of demographic impact of recent. I think we'll have to wait. As I was saying, I was looking at the possibility that we look at it, the current era that we are living through, as possibly one of the the fifth major class of migrations, which are driven by differences in population growth rates, along with differences in GDP per capita. So that's triggering large-scale population movements. Are they? We are talking about migration movements that lasted hundreds of years. What you are talking about are migration movements that happened over last decade, 2 decades. These are completely two different scales. So I'm not sure how to answer that. I would rather wait for data that comes in over a far longer period of time before answering that question. We don't know.
സാർ ഇന്നത്തെ നോർത്ത് ഇന്ത്യയിൽ ഈ പ്രാചീന തമിഴിൻ്റെ എന്തെങ്കിലും എഴുത്തുകൂത്തുകളോ കാര്യങ്ങളോ നമുക്ക് ലഭിച്ചിട്ടുണ്ടോ? ദാറ്റ്സ് വൺ ഫസ്റ്റ് ക്വസ്റ്റ്യൻ. സെക്കൻഡ് കാര്യം, അത് വളരെ 700 ഇയേഴ്സോളം നിന്നിരുന്നതാണ്. അപ്പോൾ എന്തെങ്കിലും എൻ്റെ ലിറ്ററേച്ചർ ഹരപ്പൻ കോഡ് അടക്കം ഡെസിഫർ ചെയ്തിട്ടുണ്ടെങ്കിൽ അതിൻ്റെ പോസിബിലിറ്റീസ്. സെക്കൻഡ്, ഈ സരസ്വതി നദിയെയാണ് പലപ്പോഴും ഒരു ക്ലെയിമായി ചൂണ്ടിക്കാട്ടാറുള്ളത്. സരസ്വതി വറ്റുന്നത് വളരെ മുമ്പാണെന്നും അങ്ങനെയാണെങ്കിൽ ഈ മൂവിങ് പോപ്പുലേഷൻ ഈ സരസ്വതി ഒരുപാട് മെൻഷൻ ചെയ്യാൻ കഴിയില്ലെന്നും ഉള്ളൊരു ആർഗ്യുമെൻ്റാണ് പറയാറുള്ളത്. സരസ്വതി 3500 മുമ്പ് വറ്റിപ്പോയി എന്ന് ബ്രിട്ടീഷ് മറൈൻ ആർക്കിയോളജിസ്റ്റുകളുടെ ക്ലെയിം ഉണ്ടെന്ന് BBC ഒക്കെ റിപ്പോർട്ട് ചെയ്തിട്ടുണ്ടായിരുന്നു. അപ്പോൾ ഈ പണ്ടത്തെ തമിഴിൻ്റെ ലിറ്ററേച്ചർ എന്തെങ്കിലും കിട്ടിയിട്ടുണ്ടോ? വൺ. സെക്കൻഡ്, ഈ സരസ്വതി നദിയുടെ ചേർത്ത് വെച്ചുള്ള ക്ലെയിമിനെ എങ്ങനെ കാണും?
The earliest Tamil literature that we have are Sangam literature, and they are not older than, say, a 3rd century BCE or maybe beginnings of Common Era. That's the earliest Tamil literature that we have. You are asking whether they were Tamil literature from the north. No, not that I am aware of. The script has not been deciphered, and if you were to ask me whether the script is likely to be deciphered, I do not see any, unless we strike lucky and we have something like the Rosetta Stone that is found, where you have the same thing written in 3 different scripts, and therefore you can easily decipher one of the scripts. That's how many, so unless we strike lucky like that, it's highly unlikely that we will decipher the script anytime soon. About the Saraswati, well, my book has an entire appendix on this question of the Saraswati Valley and the Gagar Hakra. There are multiple explanations that are there. One is the first of all, it is not it's not necessary. I've quoted people who have written on the Saraswati Valley. It's not necessary that after 2000 BCE that Saraswati never had water again. It's possible that it had, because we now know that the reason why Saraswati went dry is because of a long drought that happened in the region that affected many civilizations. It was never, now we know that it was never a Himalayan river. Earlier there was a suggestion that, because the Vedas talk about the powerful rushing waters of the Saraswati, etc., which suggests that it's a Himalayan snow melt fed river, because it's those kind of rivers that have that kind of power. But we know that now that Saraswati, the river that is often thought of as having Saraswati, it never had Himalayan waters, unless you are going back some horrendous amount of time. So there are multiple reasons for why. One, the suggestion that that river went dry in 2000 BC and never had water again need not be a plausible answer. There could have been short periods after that where the water was running. It is also possible that my book talks about a river called Harakswati in Afghanistan, which if you are looking at the migration, it's possible that they came across Harakswati much earlier, and they were quite well taken up with it, and that have transferred the name of that river and many of its characteristics to a river that they came across much later. So there are multiple explanations. So please read the appendix, which deals with this question in detail.
Sir.
Yeah.
So my question is regarding the language, the connection with Dravidian language, Proto-Dravidian language and the Harappan language.
Yeah.
In your book, you have mentioned about Airavata Mahadevan's work.
Yes.
And in this lecture too, you have mentioned the Proto-Dravidian language and its connection with the Elamite language and the Proto-Dravidian languages.
That's right.
So my question, if the Harappans, after the decline, they have migrated from north to south, so they must have covered or crossed the modern day Maharashtra, Karnataka, Andhra and all this region before coming into the southernmost tip.
Correct.
Okay, so if that logic is true, so then Kannada, Telugu, these languages must be older than Telugu, because they have split it even before Tamil and Malayalam from the same or Proto-Dravidian languages. But all the evidences and all the evidences show that Tamil is the oldest and the purest language.
I am not sure that I would agree with the Tamil is the oldest and the purest. These are.
But the connection shows the Elamite language and all these languages have most connection with.
Let me explain. My book, there are two things. One, my book says it's wrong to think that Dravidian languages came to South India only after the decline of the Harappan civilization. This is the first mistake.
So actually, this is my question, sir. Actually, so if we apply the same logic, so it should be the other way around, sir, because the migration from south to north.
No. What it says is that Harappans, the Dravidian languages came to southern part of India around 2800 BCE, or even slightly earlier, from the north. Why is that? What is the evidence for it? Most languages spread, as we saw. Most languages spread, given the spread that they have, because of the population explosion and the resultant migration that happens when people settle down and do farming. That's a strong part. So the question that you have to look at in Dravidian languages in South India is that when did that happen in South India? So we know that by around 3000 BCE, people, there are evidence of in South India, there's domestication of millets and pulses that's happening. And we see around 2800 BC or somewhere around there, this gets the first introduction of cattle rearing or domesticated cattle gets, and domesticated animals and domesticated plants together as a package. That's a full agricultural package. A full agricultural package to spread as a new lifestyle and population to expand. You need multiple domesticated plants and you need multiple domesticated animals. This is the package, full package. So by around 2800 CE, we can see the full package of domesticated millets, pulses and the animals coming into place in South India. Now the question is, according to the archaeobotanist who's done the maximum work on India and on South India in particular, Fuller, Dorian Q. Fuller, he says the domesticated animals that you see in India were introduced from the north. Now, who introduced them? I suggest in my book, there is a grassland that connects North India to the Deccan and to the South India. And it is likely that the domesticated animals were introduced into South India by herders from the north. Who were these herders? The herders are, as we said, the people who came from Zagros to northwestern India were herders who came, and some of them mixed with the first Indians and spread agriculture, not all. In fact, even today, the Brahui, who they are still herders. So there is a population of the people who came from the Zagros to northwestern India, who till now, you're talking about 7,000 years later, are still herders. And it is those herders who would have been taken the animals and brought it to South India. If you look at that, then the language that they brought would have been a version of Proto-Elamite. And that's the first introduction of Dravidian language to South India. And when that agriculture, that package spreads, that language spreads into all the regions. So when the Harappan civilization declined and the Harappans moved down south, it is likely that they were not coming into an area which they had never heard of Dravidian, but which was already familiar with some form of Dravidian language. So that's the answer to your question. Please read the book.
So that means we are descendants of these Elamite people, or the direct descendants of Zagosian people.
We should always see that almost all the time that I was talking about things, I was talking about languages. When you say Indo-European languages, Indo-European language speaking people who call themselves Arya. Dravidian is a language descriptor. Dravidian is not a race descriptor. Everyone who speaks a Dravidian language, there's no such thing as a Dravidian race. So if you're saying...
So I'm talking about the perspective of language itself.
Yes, I'm strongly suggesting that it came from Zagros. It was the dominant language of the Harappan civilization, and that it reached South India before the decline of the civilization.
So, ഒരു സംശയം, ഞാനൊരു ഹിസ്റ്ററി സ്റ്റുഡൻ്റ് അല്ലെങ്കിലും സാർ മിക്സിങ്ങിനെ പറ്റി വളരെയധികം പറഞ്ഞു. അപ്പോൾ അതിനകത്തൊരു സംശയമുള്ളത്, കേരളത്തിൽ കേൾക്കുന്നുണ്ടോ സാറേ?
എവിടെയാണ്
കേൾക്കുന്നുണ്ടോ? ഇവിടെ
ശരി
സാറേ, കേരളത്തിൽ ഇപ്പോൾ നമുക്ക് ബൈ അപ്പിയറൻസ് തന്നെ കുറവർ സമുദായത്തെ കണ്ടാൽ നമുക്ക് വളരെ വ്യക്തമായിട്ടറിയാം. അവരെ പുലയർ സമുദായത്തിൽ നിന്ന് നമുക്ക് ഡിഫറൻഷ്യേറ്റ് ചെയ്യാൻ കഴിയും, അവരെ പറയർ സമുദായത്തിൽ നിന്ന് ഡിഫറൻഷ്യേറ്റ് ചെയ്യാൻ കഴിയും. പക്ഷേ ഇവരെ തന്നെ നമുക്ക് നായർ സമുദായത്തിന് കുറച്ചുകൂടെ വ്യക്തമായി ഡിഫറൻഷ്യേറ്റ് ചെയ്യാൻ കഴിയും. ഇത് നമ്പൂതിരി സമുദായത്തെ നമുക്ക് ഡിഫറൻഷ്യേറ്റ് ചെയ്യാം, വേറെ ഹയറോ ലോവറോ എന്നുള്ളതല്ല. അപ്പോൾ നമുക്കിങ്ങനെ വ്യക്തമായിട്ടുള്ള ഡിഫറൻസിയേഷൻ കൂടുതൽ വ്യക്തമാകുമ്പോൾ മിക്സിങ് അത്രത്തോളം പ്രാധാന്യം ഉള്ളതാണോ? മിക്സിംഗ് ഓഫ് ഇത് അത്രത്തോളം പ്രാധാന്യമുള്ളതാണോ? മിക്സിങ്ങിനേക്കാൾ ഡിഫറൻസിയേഷന് പ്രാധാന്യമില്ല.
I said both. I said mixing for 2000 years, segregation for 2000 years. The mixing has been as much evident in our genetic track record. As I said, you can go anywhere, even the remotest population group, and see that it is mixed. But so is the effect of 2000 years of genetic segregation through the caste system. So both are right. I would say that my book says that in many ways Ambedkar was right in saying that in some ways in saying that there's no genetic difference between the he talks about who are the Shudras and the others. He's right, because there was significant mixing that happened for 2000 years. So that's the answer. But our genetic history today is a history of both mixing, and after the mixing happened, a period of segregation. Both are true.
One second, hold on. Please, here is a question.
Sir, your book thankfully has opened up a plethora of questions and answers and a lot of debates. So, എനിക്കിതിനകത്ത് ആധികാരികമായിട്ട് ഒന്നും അറിയില്ല, പക്ഷേ ആസ് എ ലേമൻ I would like to ask two questions. One is something that you already touched upon, and also somebody asked the question earlier. The Varna versus caste, the origins of the caste system. There must have been some kind of a logical explanation, right? In the context that, is there any other instance in the world where such a caste system exists? There is one theory that says Aryans brought it along with them because there are remnants of that in the Persian area. Again, a theory പറയുന്നുണ്ട്. I mean, there are tens of theories like Aryan invasion theory, Mortimer Wheeler theory, Harappan decline പറയുന്ന പോലെ ഇതിലൊരു 5-6 theory ഉണ്ട്. പക്ഷേ there should be some kind of a substantial basis why it has existed all through time. For instance, the Jajmani system that exists, anthropology is a case study, the Jajmani system, why it has survived over the years, or it still exists in villages, in many villages, in even in South India, in Andhra and things like that. So, at a personal level, what do you think would have been the basis or the reason that it has survived all these years? Even though you could say that there can be no, plausible or logical, reason it should. That is the first question.
It's a beautiful system. I don't think anything remotely similar has ever been invented, which has made every part of, whoever is part of that system, interested in sustaining it.
Which brings us to the other theory that...
Which is not new. It's not a new insight. It's an insight given by Ambedkar.
Correct.
Because nobody in the system will combine with somebody below him to fight against those above him, because he loses his status. So there is no other system that has been devised that is so beautifully that that this can't be broken.
Social order,
and
probably.
This is even today true. In electoral politics, it is true. You want two caste groups won't, one caste group won't combine with another caste group below that to fight the caste group above that. Pardon? Intelligently designed.
And then there's the theory that...
It's a self-perpetuating system of uncommon ingenuity. And to say how it came about is a different question. As I said, repeatedly said, this comes in the epilogue of my book. It's not a question that I have only pointers to make. I have no suggestions, because I think it requires... New information has come into domain in the last few months. Okay. Just remember, all this, all this data about genetic segregation, etc. I mean, not few months, a few years. It has not yet been digested full by the academic community, and no one person can answer this question because it's a very large question. It's about a system that has survived for so long and affects 1.3 billion people. So there can be no simple solutions to it, and it requires serious work. The only thing that I am saying is that there's new information. Please now look at it. There's answer. What happened around 100 CE or 300 CE? What is it that happened that made perhaps what was a seed of an idea in a small community into a system that spread it across? What you can see is that it is, what I can suggest, as I said, all these are, I will not, 2 days later, I may not stand by it as I have changed my opinion because I have not looked at it closely. That's why it's in the epilogue. And I say clearly that it's a subjective. What it looks likely is that there is a new idea of kingdom and how a kingdom should be run, and what is the ideal kingdom that arose around that period of time. And that probably arose as a result of the challenge put up by other religions such as Buddhism and Jainism. People usually think that Buddhism and Jainism arose in response to a well-settled caste system. It's now fairly clear that that is not the case. I think Buddhism and Jainism are actually pushing back against not a well-settled caste system. They are pushing back against ideas of new hierarchy that are forming. So it's not a settled system that they're fighting, it's a system in formation that they are arguing against. And they are saying, no, that's not the way to go. So when you say that, but the fact that Buddhism and these religions got major royal backing from the new kingdoms that were arising, like in the Magadha, and might have led to a backlash. And a new kind of kingdom had to be imagined, put forward, that people will buy into. And I think the part of the story is that imagination of the system is only no more important than what I think is that it was bought into by people. It was bought into. It was a very powerful, it was a powerful imagery of what a king should be and how the society should be, that it makes sense for it to be structured into 4 layers. So, I mean, the vision of a kingdom that was bought into not just in India, even in other countries, in East Asia, and these were powerful imageries. So, as I said, all my answers are pointers, but I think they are pointers of that we
more
need to
do with
understand
social
more.
order and things like that.
That we need to understand more what happened.
The second sub-question is, so the whole theory that, in your book also you have mentioned about Athirambakam, and also quoting from your book, did all of them belong to the same species as the Narmada discovery, perhaps Homo heidelbergensis or Homo erectus, or another archaic human as yet undiscovered? This is not entirely unlikely. And then there is this recent discovery in Israel, 180,000 years ago. Then Athirambakam shows us it's 385,000 years ago. So this pushes forward the whole out of Africa theory. So I'm asking this in a more academic context, that how substantial is the evidence that we have right now? And even if it is substantial, are we not Western conformists? And how difficult would it be to actually push forward this alternate theory or a strain of thought? Or are we waiting for even new, better evidence to actually, bring forth this out of Africa theory? Or what the Western, theories that we've already learned and been established and things like that? How difficult would it be to break that at this point?
I'm not sure that I understood. Your question is, could you say that again? I'm not sure that I understood.
Now the context that... in the light of the Israel and the Athirambakam discoveries.
No, both these discoveries do not challenge it. That's what I do not follow. Which is the Israel discovery, 180,000. That, see, if you read the book, you will see that when you say that 70,000 years ago, modern humans went out and, spread around the world, it only says that was the first successful out of Africa migration that led to a lineage around the world. It doesn't mean that this is the first time modern humans got out of Africa. That happened 180,000 years ago in Israel. You will find evidence. In so many others you will find evidence. But they do not leave a lineage with a genetic track record that is today visible across the world. So when you say 70, so the Israel evidence does not militate against the Athirambakam is clear. Athirambakam, you are talking about 385,000 years. 1.5 million years, obviously. 1.5 million years, obviously, is a archaic human. It's not a modern human, because modern human arises only around 300,000 years ago. And 300,000 years ago, what you see is actually not even a fully formed modern human. So 1.3 million obviously is another Homo species, and that same applies to the Athirambakam 385,000 years. Those are also archaic humans, not modern humans. So both these discoveries do not challenge existing ideas about out of Africa migration. Because they deal with the Israel one deals with modern humans, but that is an unsuccessful migration that happened.
What are your views on the status of women during this journey for 65,000 years? Maybe you have been tracking the genetic signatures, and the question is, has more social perspective to it?
During the out of Africa hunt, the answer would be, what was the status of women during the hunter-gatherer stage, as opposed to in the farming stage? Did things change when farming began? I think it is fair to say that things did change when farming began, and I suspect that it changed for the worse as far as gender relations are concerned, as far as women are concerned, because many of the, but as I said, this is not an area that I'm an expert in, so I'm just sharing what I think are my opinions. So this is not a scientific opinion. So I suspect that the settling down and farming created many of the gender stereotypes today that women are fighting against, and that the hunter-gatherer way of life, which was what was prevalent during the out of Africa migrations, had less inequalities in them. They may have been more brutal, but probably had less inequalities because everyone had to scramble for themselves. There's not much surplus to be had. So to that extent, there would have been greater equality, is what I would say. I don't know whether I answered the question, but yes, the farming and the discovery of farming would seem to be the beginning of many of the stereotypes that we today fight against in a different social structure.
Yeah. One second, please. There is a question for after that.
10 more minutes to.
Yeah.
We have 10 more minutes to.
So we'll take 2 questions from behind. Yeah, perhaps if the time allows. Is there any?
Hello. Sir, ഉള്ള സബ്ജക്റ്റീവായുള്ളൊരു ഒബ്സർവേഷനിൽ നിന്നുള്ള സംശയമാണ് ഒന്ന്. നമ്മൾ ഋഗ്വേദം ഒരുപാട് ഇമേജുകൾ ഭയങ്കരമായിട്ട് ഉപയോഗിക്കുന്നുണ്ട്. ഋഗ്വേദം നമ്മൾ
എവിടെയാണ്?
അപ്പം നമ്മളുടെ ഇപ്പോഴത്തെ സാറിൻ്റെ പുസ്തകം വെച്ചിട്ടാണെങ്കിലും അതിൻ്റെ ഒരു ധാരണയെന്ന് വെച്ചാൽ ഹാരപ്പൻ സിവിലൈസേഷന് വളരെ ശേഷമാണ് എഴുതപ്പെട്ടിരിക്കുന്നത്. അല്ല, ഋഗ്വേദത്തിലുള്ള ഇമേജ് വെച്ച് നമ്മൾ നോക്കുമ്പോഴും ഒരു കളക്റ്റീവ് മെമ്മറിയിൽ ഒരു വലിയ സിവിലൈസേഷനോ അർബൻ സ്റ്റേറ്റോ ഉണ്ടായിരുന്ന ഒരു ജനവിഭാഗമല്ല ഋഗ്വേദം എഴുതിയിരിക്കുന്നത്. വളരെ പാസ്റ്ററലായിട്ടുള്ള, അതുകൊണ്ട് അത്ര കോംപ്ലക്സിറ്റീസ് ഇല്ല. ഋഗ്വേദത്തിന് അത്ര കോംപ്ലക്സിറ്റീസ് ഇല്ല. അങ്ങനെ ഉള്ള ഋഗ്വേദം അപ്പോൾ അത്രയും ഒരു വ്യത്യാസമുണ്ട്, പീരിയഡിൻ്റെ വ്യത്യാസം ഉണ്ടാകും. അതുപോലെ കൺസെപ്റ്റിൻ്റെയോ ഇമേജിൻ്റെയോ അല്ലെങ്കിൽ ലൈഫിൻ്റെ സോഫിസ്റ്റിക്കേഷൻ്റെയോ കോംപ്ലക്സിറ്റീസ് തീരെ ഇല്ലാത്ത ഒരു പാസ്റ്ററൽ ലൈഫിൻ്റെ പ്രൊഡക്റ്റായിട്ടാണ് ഈ സാധനത്തിന് നമുക്ക് കാണാൻ പറ്റുന്നുള്ളൂ. അതിൻ്റെ ഇമേജ് വെച്ച് നോക്കുമ്പോഴാണ് വളരെ ബ്യൂട്ടിഫുൾ ആയിട്ടുള്ള ഇമേജ് ഡിസ്ക്രിപ്ഷൻസ് ഒരുപാട് ഋഗ്വേദത്തിലുണ്ട് താനും. അപ്പോൾ സ്വാഭാവികമായിട്ടും ഋഗ്വേദം എഴുതിയിട്ടുള്ള ജനവിഭാഗം ഏതെങ്കിലും ഒരു സമയത്ത് ഹാരപ്പൻ സിവിലൈസേഷൻ പോലെയുള്ള ഇത്രയും സോഫിസ്റ്റിക്കേറ്റഡ് ആയിട്ടുള്ള ഇത്രയും സ്പെക്ടാക്കുലർ ആയിട്ടുള്ള ഒരു സിവിലൈസേഷനുമായിട്ട് കോണ്ടാക്ട് വന്നിട്ടുണ്ടെങ്കിൽ അതിൻ്റെ വൊക്കാബുലറിയിൽ, അതിൻ്റെ ഒരു ഇമേജറിയിൽ, റിപ്പോർട്ട് ഓഫ് ഇമേജറിയിൽ അതിൻ്റെ സൂചനകൾ വരേണ്ടതാണ്. ഇവിടെ ഋഗ്വേദത്തിൽ അങ്ങനൊരു സൂചന ഉണ്ടെന്ന് എനിക്ക് തോന്നുന്നില്ല. വളരെ അപൂർവമായിട്ടാണ് പുരത്തിനെ കുറിച്ച് പറയുന്നത്. അത് എന്തായാലും ഈ നമ്മുടെ ഹാരപ്പൻ സിവിലൈസേഷനകത്തുണ്ടായിരുന്ന പുരങ്ങളുടെ ഒരു തരത്തിലുള്ള സിമിലാരിറ്റീസ് ഉള്ളതല്ല. അങ്ങനെ ഇരിക്കുമ്പോൾ സാർ പറയുന്നുണ്ട് ഷിഷ്ണുദേവൻ്റെ പ്രതിമയെ കൈകാലുകൾ മുറിച്ചതായിട്ടും അത് മ്യൂട്ടിലേറ്റ് ചെയ്യുന്ന ഒരവസ്ഥ ഉണ്ടായിരുന്നു എന്ന് പറയുന്നുണ്ട്. അതിനകത്തൊരു കോൺട്രാഡിക്ഷൻ ഇല്ല എന്നുള്ളതാണ് ഒരു ചോദ്യം. അത്
No, read that part again. I did not say that the Shishnadeva were destroyed by the incoming Aryans. No, I said it could have been an internal rebellion within Dholavira during the last stages of the Harappan civilization. That part is used in the book to say that there is a disconnect between what is visible as the phallus worship in the Harappan civilization, according to the archaeologists who discovered, who excavated Dholavira. There's a disconnect between that and the fact that the Rig Veda speaks poorly of phallus worship and phallus worshippers. So this was mentioned in the book merely to show the disconnect, one where there is phallus worship and one where those phallus worshippers are really denounced, and hope that they will stay far away from sacred things. So that was the purpose. That's what that part says. So it doesn't say that this was destroyed by the incoming idea.
രണ്ട് കാര്യങ്ങൾ എൻ്റെ ഒരു സംശയം ക്ലിയർ ചെയ്യാനായിട്ട് ഞാൻ സാറിനോട് പറയുകയാണ്. അതായത് ഒന്ന് സംശയം എന്ന് വെച്ചുള്ളത് ഋഗ്വേദവും അതിനുശേഷം ഋഗ്വേദവും ഹാരപ്പൻ സിവിലൈസേഷനുമായിട്ട് ഒരു വലിയ ഡിസ്കണക്റ്റ് ഉണ്ട്. പക്ഷെ അതിനുശേഷമുള്ള വേദങ്ങളും ഹാരപ്പൻ സിവിലൈസേഷനുമായിട്ട് ഒരു കണക്റ്റ് ഉണ്ട്.
അതെ, ശരിയാണ്.
ആ കണക്റ്റ് ഉള്ള സ്ഥിതിക്ക് അപ്പം ഋഗ്വേദത്തിന് ശേഷമാണ് ഹാരപ്പൻ സിവിലൈസേഷനുമായിട്ട് സ്വാഭാവികമായിട്ടും ആ ജനവിഭാഗം ഇൻട്രാക്ട് ചെയ്തിട്ടുള്ളത്. അതുകൊണ്ടായിരിക്കണം ആ കണക്റ്റ് വന്നിരിക്കുന്നത്. രണ്ട് കാരണങ്ങൾ പറയുന്നത്, ഒന്ന് ഡ്രോട്ടാണ്, വളരെ ലോങ് ടൈം ആയിട്ടുള്ള മെഗാ ഡ്രോട്ട് ഉണ്ടായിരുന്നു. പിന്നെ ഒന്ന് ഈ സ്വാഭാവികമായിട്ടും പുറത്തുനിന്നൊരു ജനവിഭാഗം വന്ന് അവരുടെ നോമിനൻസ്. ഈ രണ്ട് കാരണങ്ങളും ഇതിനെ ആക്സിലറേറ്റ് ചെയ്തിട്ടുണ്ട് മിനിമം ഇതിൻ്റെ ഡിക്ലൈൻ, അതിൻ്റെ ഡിസിൻറ്റഗ്രേഷനെ. അപ്പോൾ അതിലാണ് എനിക്കിങ്ങനെ സംശയം വന്നത്. അപ്പോൾ സാർ അത് അങ്ങനെ ഒരു സൂചന ആ പുസ്തകത്തിൽ വരുന്നുണ്ടോ എന്നൊരു സംശയമുണ്ട്. അതായിരുന്നു ഒരു ക്ലാരിറ്റി വേണ്ടത്. പിന്നെ രണ്ടാമത്തെ ഒരു ചോദ്യം എന്ന് വെച്ചാൽ, പാലസ്തീൻ, നമ്മൾ 11th സിറിയ, പാലസ്തീൻ തുടങ്ങിയുള്ള സ്ഥലങ്ങളിലുള്ള ഒരു അഗ്രികൾച്ചറൽ അല്ലെങ്കിൽ ഒരു പ്രീ അഗ്രികൾച്ചറൽ ഒരു കമ്മ്യൂണിറ്റിയെ കുറിച്ച് സംസാരിക്കുന്നുണ്ട്. 10,000 വർഷത്തിന് മുമ്പുള്ളത് തൊട്ട്, അതുപോലെ നമുക്കിവിടെ ലഹുർദേവയിൽ 7,000 വർഷം മുമ്പുള്ള ആ ഒരു പീരീഡിനെ കുറിച്ച് സംസാരിക്കുന്നുണ്ട്. അപ്പോൾ ഈ രണ്ട് പീരീഡിൻ്റെയും ആ രണ്ട് പേരുടെ, ഒന്ന് എനിക്ക് വന്നത് അനറ്റോളിയൻ അഗ്രികൾച്ചറിസ്റ്റുകളാണ്, മറ്റേത് നമ്മൾ ഇവിടെ ഏതാണെന്ന് കൃത്യമായിട്ട് അത് പറയുന്നില്ലെങ്കിലും ഇൻഡിജിനസ് ആയിട്ടുള്ള ഇന്ത്യൻ അഗ്രികൾച്ചറൽ ബേസാണ്. ഈ രണ്ട് അല്ലെങ്കിൽ അതുപോലെയുള്ള സമാനമായിട്ടുള്ള മറ്റ് കൾച്ചേഴ്സ് ഒന്നും തന്നെ സിവിലൈസേഷൻസ് ആയിട്ട് ഡെവലപ്പ് ചെയ്തില്ല. അപ്പോൾ സിവിലൈസേഷനായിട്ട് ഡെവലപ്പ് ചെയ്ത 3 സ്ഥലങ്ങൾ, അതായത് ഫെർട്ടൈൽ ക്രസൻറ്റിൻ്റെ ഭാഗമായിട്ടുള്ള ഭാഗത്തു നിന്നാണ് വരുന്നത്. ഒന്ന് ഇൻഡസ്, മെഹർഗഡ്, അതുപോലെ മെസൊപ്പൊട്ടേമിയ, പിന്നെ വരുന്നത് ഈജിപ്റ്റാണ്. ഇത് മൂന്നും തന്നെ ഫെർട്ടൈൽ സർക്കിളുമായിട്ട്, ഫെർട്ടൈൽ ക്രസൻറ്റുമായിട്ട് ഏതെങ്കിലും തരത്തിൽ ബന്ധപ്പെട്ടിരിക്കുന്നു.
ചൈന ഇസ് നോട്ട് കണക്റ്റഡ് ടു,
നോട്ട് കണക്റ്റഡ്. ഈ മൂന്ന് സിവിലൈസേഷൻസ്. അപ്പോൾ അതിൽ ഈ മെഹർഗഡിൽ വരുന്നത് സഗ്രോസ് ആണ്. അപ്പോൾ സഗ്രോസ് ആ മൗണ്ടനിൽ നിന്ന് വരുന്നത് അവർ മെസൊപ്പൊട്ടേമിയൻ സംസ്കാരത്തിൻ്റെ ഇപ്പുറത്തെ സൈഡാണ്.
അതെ.
അപ്പോൾ അവിടുന്ന് അപ്പോൾ നേരത്തെ ഉണ്ടായിരുന്ന, അപ്പോൾ അനറ്റോളിയൻ അഗ്രികൾച്ചറിസ്റ്റുകൾക്കോ അല്ലെങ്കിൽ ലഹുർദേവയിലുണ്ടായിരുന്ന അഗ്രികൾച്ചറിസ്റ്റുകൾക്കോ സിവിലൈസേഷനായിട്ട് മാറാൻ പറ്റില്ല. അപ്പോൾ ഇതിന് ആ സിവിലൈസേഷനേക്ക് മാറുന്ന ആ പ്രോസസ്സിനെ ട്രിഗർ ചെയ്യുന്നത് ഈ സഗ്രോസിൽ നിന്നുള്ള ആ ചെറിയ ജനവിഭാഗമാണ്. അപ്പോൾ അങ്ങനെയാണെങ്കിൽ ഈ മെസൊപ്പൊട്ടേമിയയ്ക്കും, അതിപ്പോൾ സാർ പ്രോട്ടോ എലമെൻറ്റിനെ കുറിച്ച് പറയുന്നുണ്ട്, അത് വളരെ ബ്യൂട്ടിഫുൾ ആയിട്ട് ബ്രഹൂയി ലാംഗ്വേജിൻ്റെ പ്ലേസ്. ശരിയാണോ? അപ്പോൾ ഓക്കെ. അപ്പോൾ ഇതിനെ ട്രിഗർ ചെയ്യുന്നത് സഗ്രോസിൽ നിന്ന് വരുന്ന ജനവിഭാഗമാണ്. ഇതിലിപ്പോൾ പ്രോട്ടോ എലിമെന്റിനെ കുറിച്ച് പറയുമ്പോൾ വളരെ ബ്യൂട്ടിഫുൾ ആയിട്ടുള്ള ആ പോർഷൻ വളരെ ബ്യൂട്ടിഫുൾ ആണ്. കാരണം എന്ന് വെച്ചാൽ ബ്രഹൂയിയുടെ സ്ഥാനത്തെയും അതിൻ്റെ ജനങ്ങളുടെ പൊസിഷനെയും ലാംഗ്വേജിനെയും വളരെ നന്നായി അത് വയ്ക്കുന്നുണ്ട്. വളരെ മനോഹരമായിട്ടുണ്ട് ആ ഒരു പോർഷൻ. അപ്പോൾ അതിൽ എൻ്റെ ഒരു സംശയം എന്ന് വെച്ചാൽ, ഈ പ്രോട്ടോ എലമൈറ്റ് ലാംഗ്വേജ് ഉൾപ്പെടെയുള്ള വരുന്ന സഗ്രോസ് അവർ തന്നെയാണ് ഒരുപക്ഷെ മെസൊപ്പൊട്ടേമിയയും ഇന്ത്യയിലെ ഈ ഹരപ്പൻ സിവിലൈസേഷനെയും ഒരു സിവിലൈസേഷനിലേക്ക് മാറ്റുന്നത്. അതിൻ്റെ ഒരു കാറ്റലിസ്റ്റ് അല്ലെങ്കിൽ ഒരു പക്ഷേ അതിൻ്റെ മെയിൻ ആൻഡ് ട്രിഗറിങ് പോയിന്റ്, ആ എനർജി വരുന്ന അവരിൽ നിന്നാണ്. അത് നമ്മൾ ഔട്ട് ഓഫ് ആഫ്രിക്ക മൈഗ്രേഷൻ എന്ന് പറയുന്നത് പോലെ തന്നെ ഒരു ചെറിയൊരു വിഭാഗം, ശരിയാണോ? ഈ ഔട്ട് ഓഫ് ആഫ്രിക്ക, സോറി ഔട്ട് ഓഫ് ആഫ്രിക്ക തിയറി പോലെ, ഔട്ട് ഓഫ് ആഫ്രിക്ക ഒരു മദർ, ഒരു ഫാദർ, അങ്ങനെ ഒരു അതിനുള്ളൊരു സാധ്യതയുണ്ട്. ഒരു ഹൈപ്പോത്തറ്റിക്കൽ ക്വസ്റ്റ്യനാണ് സഗ്രോസിൽ നിന്ന്. അത് മെസൊപ്പൊട്ടേമിയൻ ഇതിനെയും അതുപോലെ ഈ ഇൻഡസിനെയും കണക്ട് ചെയ്യുന്ന ഒരു ഔട്ട് ഓഫ് ആഫ്രിക്ക മൈഗ്രേഷൻ പോലെയുള്ള ഒരു പോയിന്റ് അതിനകത്തുണ്ടോ എന്നുള്ളത്. വേറൊരു കാര്യം, ഈ പീരീഡിന്റെ കണ്ടം ജസ്റ്റ് വൺ മോർ ക്വസ്റ്റ്യൻ. ഇതേ പീരീഡാണ് പിന്നെ ഈജിപ്ഷ്യൻ സംസ്കാരത്തിൻ്റെയും. അപ്പോൾ ഈജിപ്ഷ്യൻ സംസ്കാരത്തിലും ഈ ഇൻഡസുമായിട്ട് പൂർണ്ണമായിട്ട് ഡയറക്റ്റ് ഇൻട്രാക്ഷൻസ് ഉണ്ടായിരുന്നു. പക്ഷേ ആ ഈജിപ്ഷ്യൻ സംസ്കാരത്തിനെ കുറിച്ചുള്ള പൂർണ്ണമായിട്ട് ലെഫ്റ്റ് ഔട്ട് ചെയ്തിരിക്കുകയാണ് ഈ പുസ്തകത്തിൽ. അതെന്തുകൊണ്ടാണ് ഉള്ളത്?
There has been, if they have, to the extent that there were connections between the Egyptian civilization, as far as we can see, they would have been indirect through trade, that goes through Mesopotamia. But the link between the Mesopotamian civilization and what they called Meluha or the Harappan civilization is very direct. And there are enough and more records of it on the Harappan, on the Mesopotamian sites that refer to or mention those links. So that's why it gets far more attention than the than the Egyptian civilization links. It's not to say there were no links, but there is not anywhere near as record, and I would imagine that relationship is more derived or second stage. As for the, see, I think civilization, if you go by etymology, civilization refers to the beginning of urbanization. Civilization comes from city, and without an urbanization where we do not talk about beginning of agriculture, we do not usually talk about as civilization. It has to develop in urban cities. What is necessary for an urban civilization is the kind of productivity that agriculture gives. Depends on what kind of agriculture that there is, what kind of fertile land you are in, so that a small portion of the people devoting their time to agriculture provides enough food for a lot of other people to do a lot of other kind of work, building cities, building statues, dreaming up new gods, or whatever it is that they do. So it is intrinsically linked. Whether then civilization arose is dependent on what kind of cultivation, agriculture did you begin? Was it highly productive? Was it a highly fertile area, or did you find new ways of irrigating it or cultivating it that gave them that? So those are the questions. Whether the group that came to Zagros region to northwestern India is not the group that is connected to the Anatolian, for example, the farmers who went on to Africa. These are slightly different groups. They all are part or on the fringes, either part or on the fringes of what is normally called the Fertile Crescent area when the agricultural revolution is happening. But I wouldn't look at it as one group that sparked off many other things. I don't think that would be correct.
Shall we take the last question?
Yeah. Can I?
Yeah.
All right. Thanks for giving us this well-researched and equally provocative book. You have touched upon a topic which this gentleman has asked about the dietary habits. Isn't it contradictory that when you say, the central and western India, they consume milk and not meat, and it has got some connections with the European. Are they not equally Europeans? The dietary habits, if you look into. They also consume meat as much as they take milk, so
That's right.
Is it a sort of contradiction in when you say that?
No, I use the words carefully. I did not say that, you would drink milk more and therefore no. I said they had the option.
All right, okay.
Those who have, they have the option. The others don't have the option.
Okay.
That's the difference. Now, that you have the option doesn't mean everyone who has the option takes that option. That we did. The people in northwestern or western and northern India did take that option.
Mm-hmm.
The westerners did not.
All right.
But that's at least an option that they had.
Mm-hmm.
That was the only limited point.
Okay. In conclusion, you have been associated with most of the business dailies. Your contemporaries, maybe Nayanan and Venu, ventured into the entrepreneurial side, and you choose to, do the research. Has it got something to do with the last 5 or 6 years political changes which had happened, or what was that change? The trigger that made you change from the routine, work which you are doing and getting into the sort of research what you are doing and giving us this beautiful book.
Thank you. So I was saying that the original, what fascinated me was the Harappan civilization always. That's where the interest began. I just had, 6 years ago, I had the luxury of devoting myself to this project without a clear deadline in mind. And that's a luxury that few people have. So that's, pardon? No, that's, the project started without that. But it is not that as I was saying that as I started on the project, then you realize that this is not just about Harappan civilization, that is, it's about forming the entire population. And it is obvious to anyone that's a question that is loaded with political implications. And that's what I have tried to do, is to make sure that it tells facts as they are without, and the importance of it is because the political importance of the project is clear to me, that I've gone out of my way to make sure that facts are separate from the opinions or subjective opinions. My opinions are limited to the epilogue. The rest are based on what the science is saying, and where I have gone wherever the science leads you. Pardon? Why do I stop at the epilogue? Wait for my next book?
We conclude the discussion here, at least to make a final note, I think so. As far as the discussion, the very important point which I feel is that the caste system which evolved is a purely political thing. It doesn't have any relation to migrations, it doesn't have a relation to geography, it doesn't have any relation to climate or anything. It is just a political event which triggered this thing. So it's a hope that we have is that it could be reversed also. Yes. Just because the political thing, it could be reversed also. It's a possibility of reversing it. That's a hope we have. And thank you all. എല്ലാവരും ഇവിടെ ഇത്രയും സമയം ഇവിടെ ഇരുന്ന് ഈ നല്ല ചർച്ച, വളരെ നല്ല ചർച്ചയായിരുന്നു. എനിക്കത് തിരുവനന്തപുരം ഒരു സമൂഹത്തിൻ്റെ അകത്ത് ഇത്രയും ഒരു നല്ല ചർച്ച ഈ ഇടയ്ക്ക് നമ്മൾ ഇപ്പോഴാണെന്ന് തോന്നുന്നു. എല്ലാ ചർച്ചയിൽ പങ്കെടുത്ത എല്ലാവർക്കും ടോണി ജോസഫിനും നന്ദി പറയുന്നു. ആശംസകൾ നേരാനായിട്ട്.
Thank you very much. It's a very interesting talk.
അടുത്തതായി ഈ ഔപചാരികമായ നന്ദി കൊണ്ട് ഈ പരിപാടി അവസാനിക്കുകയാണ്. എല്ലാവർക്കും മതിയായിട്ടില്ല എന്ന ഉറപ്പാണ്, സംസാരിച്ച് മതിയായിട്ടില്ല എന്നുള്ളതറിയാം. എങ്കിലും ഈ നമുക്ക് എല്ലാവർക്കും അധ്യക്ഷ എന്നുള്ള നിലയ്ക്ക് പറയുകയാണ്, നമുക്ക് കാത്തിരിക്കാം ടോണിയുടെ അടുത്ത പുസ്തകത്തിനായിട്ട്. അതിനുള്ള കാത്തിരിപ്പ് നമുക്ക് തുടരാം. ഔപചാരികമായി നന്ദി പറയുന്നതിന് ഡോക്ടർ സജീഷിനെ ക്ഷണിക്കുന്നു.
നന്ദി പ്രകാശിപ്പിക്കുന്ന ആൾ പ്രത്യേകിച്ച് 3 മണിക്കൂറുള്ള വലിയൊരു ഹെക്റ്റിക്കായിട്ടുള്ള ഒരു ചർച്ചയും പ്രസൻറ്റേഷൻ ചർച്ചയും കഴിഞ്ഞിട്ട് വളരെ ചുരുക്കണമെന്നുള്ള ബോധ്യം എനിക്ക് നല്ലപോലെ ഉണ്ട്. എന്നാലും ഞങ്ങൾ കഴിഞ്ഞ ഒരു കൊല്ലമായിട്ട്, 14 കൊല്ലമായി ഈ നടത്തുന്ന ലെക്ചറും ഈ കഴിഞ്ഞ ഒരു കൊല്ലമായിട്ട് ഇതിൻ്റെ തയ്യാറെടുപ്പിലും പ്രിപ്പറേഷൻ നടക്കുന്നതുകൊണ്ട് അതിൽ 1-2 ഞങ്ങളുടെ ഇടയിൽ തന്നെയുള്ള കുറച്ച് ആളുകൾക്ക് പ്രത്യേകിച്ച് മെൻഷൻ ചെയ്യേണ്ടതായിട്ടുള്ളത് കൊണ്ട് 2 മിനിറ്റ് എടുക്കുകയാണ്. ഏറ്റവും ആദ്യമായിട്ട് എനിക്ക് നന്ദി പ്രകാശിപ്പിക്കേണ്ടത് എം വിജയകുമാർ, നമ്മുടെ പഴയ മന്ത്രിയും ഒക്കെയാണ്. അദ്ദേഹം ഇപ്പം കുറച്ച് മുമ്പ് പോയി. അദ്ദേഹം KTDCയിൽ ഈ ഹോളൊന്നും ഞങ്ങളെ കൊണ്ട് താങ്ങുന്നതല്ല. ഈ ഹോളും ഞങ്ങൾക്കറിയാം, എന്തായാലും ടോണി ജോസഫ് ഇവിടെ കേരളത്തിൽ വരുമ്പോൾ ഒരു വലിയ ജനസമുച്ചയം അദ്ദേഹത്തെ കാണാനും കേൾക്കാനും വരുമെന്നും അതിനു വേണ്ടിയിട്ട് ഞങ്ങൾക്ക് അത്രയും താങ്ങുന്ന ലെവലിലുള്ളതല്ല. പക്ഷേ അദ്ദേഹത്തിൻ്റെ വലിയ മനസ്സുകൊണ്ടും അദ്ദേഹത്തിൻ്റെ പ്രവൃത്തി കൊണ്ടുമാണ് ഞങ്ങൾക്ക് KTDCയിലെ ഹോളും അക്കോമഡേഷനും എല്ലാം വളരെ സൗജന്യമായ രീതിയിൽ ലഭിച്ചത്. എം വിജയകുമാറിന് ഞാൻ പ്രത്യേകിച്ച് നന്ദി പറയുന്നു. പ്രത്യേകിച്ച് അദ്ദേഹം പിന്നോയുടെ കാലഘട്ടത്തിൽ, ഞങ്ങളുടെയൊക്കെ കാലഘട്ടത്തിൽ ഞങ്ങളുടെ ഒരു മാർഗദർശി കൂടിയായിരുന്നു. ഈ ഫോട്ടോ ഞങ്ങൾ എപ്പോഴും കാണുമ്പോഴും നമ്മുടെ ഇവിടെ ഉണ്ട്, പോയിട്ടില്ലെന്ന് തോന്നുന്നു, ഡോക്ടർ മനോജ് KS എടുത്ത പടമാണ് പിന്നോയുടേത്. 14 കൊല്ലമായിട്ട് എന്നും ഞങ്ങൾക്ക് വളരെ അട്രാക്റ്റീവായിട്ട് കാണുന്നൊരു പടമാണ് ഡോക്ടർ മനോജിൻ്റെ പടം. പിന്നെ AR ഓഡിയോസ്, കാമിയോ ലൈറ്റ്സ് ആൻഡ് അനൂപ് ആൻഡ് ടീം ഫോർ യുവർ വീഡിയോ ആൻഡ് ലൈവ് സ്ട്രീമിംഗ്. യൂട്യൂബ് ലൈവ് സ്ട്രീമിംഗ് പൊയ്ക്കൊണ്ടിരിക്കുകയാണ് നമ്മളുടെ ഈ ടോക്ക് മുഴുവനായിട്ടും. പിന്നെ ഏറ്റവും പ്രധാനമായിട്ട് പറയേണ്ടത്, ഇന്നും ഞങ്ങൾക്ക് ഏറ്റവും പ്രചോദനമായിട്ടുള്ള പിന്നോയുടെ ഫാമിലി, ബെറ്റ്സിയും അന്നപൂർണയും അനസൂയയും ഷാജി പറഞ്ഞു കഴിഞ്ഞു. ദെൻ ദ മീഡിയ പീപ്പിൾ, അതിൽ ഏറ്റവും അധികം മീഡിയ ഞങ്ങളെ കോർഡിനേറ്റ് ചെയ്യും. ഞങ്ങൾ തന്നെ ഒരാളാണെങ്കിൽ പോലും പ്രത്യേകിച്ച് പേരെടുത്ത് പറയേണ്ടത് TC രാജേഷാണ്. TC രാജേഷ് മീഡിയ സംഘവും ആണ് ഞങ്ങളെ ഏറ്റവും അധികം ഇതിൽ പ്രചരണത്തിൽ സഹായിച്ചിട്ടുള്ളത്. പിന്നെ കുറച്ച് പേരുകളും കൂടെ പറയേണ്ടി വരും, കാരണം സുബ്രഹ്മണ്യനും ബെറ്റ്നിസോളും വിനോദുമൊക്കെയാണ് നിങ്ങൾ കാണുന്ന ഈ പോസ്റ്ററുകളും ഈ ലൈറ്റും ഒക്കെ അറേഞ്ച് ചെയ്യാനായിട്ട് ഞങ്ങളെ ഏറ്റവും അധികം സഹായിച്ചിട്ടുള്ളത്. പിന്നെ ഏറ്റവും വലിയൊരു പ്രത്യേകത, നമ്മൾ സാധാരണ മീറ്റിങ്ങുകളെക്കാളും ഇത് വലിയൊരു ലാർജ് സ്കെയിൽ മീറ്റിംഗ് ആയതുകൊണ്ട് ഇതിൻ്റെ ഒരു ഫണ്ടിങ് വലിയൊരു ഘടകമാണ്. പക്ഷേ ഞങ്ങൾ പ്രതീക്ഷിച്ചതിന് അപ്പുറമായിട്ട് നല്ല രീതിയിൽ ഞങ്ങളെ സഹായിച്ച ഒരു 19ഓളം, പിന്നെ ഇന്ന് തന്നെ ഞങ്ങൾക്ക് കുറേ കോൺട്രിബ്യൂഷൻസ് ഉണ്ട്. എല്ലാവരുടെയും പേരെടുത്ത് പറയണമെന്ന് ആഗ്രഹിച്ചാണ്, പക്ഷേ സമയം ഒരുപാട് വൈകിയോണ്ട് ഞങ്ങളത് പറയുന്നില്ല, അതിലോട്ട് കിടക്കുന്നില്ല. പിന്നെ ഓഡിയൻസ്, ഈ ഞങ്ങളുടെ പ്രതീക്ഷകളെല്ലാം തകിടം മറിച്ചുകൊണ്ട് തന്നെ വളരെ സജീവമായിട്ട് ഈ 3 മണിക്കൂറും ടോണി ജോസഫിനെ കേൾക്കാനും ഞങ്ങളുടെ പ്രത്യേകിച്ച് പിൻഡോ അനുസ്മരണ ലെക്ചറിലോട്ട് വരുന്ന നിങ്ങളെ ഓരോരുത്തർക്കും ഞങ്ങളുടെ പിൻഡോ സമിതിയുടെ പേരിൽ ഞാൻ നന്ദി അറിയിച്ചുകൊള്ളുന്നു. ഒരു ക്ഷമാപണം കൂടി ഉണ്ട്. കാരണം ഇത്രയും ഹാളിൽ പലർക്കും നിൽക്കേണ്ടി വന്നു, കുറേ നേരം നിൽക്കേണ്ടി വന്നു. ഈ ഒരു കഞ്ചഷന് ക്ഷമ ചോദിച്ചുകൊള്ളുന്നു. ഞങ്ങളുടെ തന്നെ ആളുകളായതുകൊണ്ട് അവസാനമായിട്ട് പറയാൻ വെച്ചിരുന്നത് പാർവതി ദേവി, സജീദും ഷാജി, പിന്നെ മോഡറേറ്റേഴ്സ് ജോണി ML ആൻഡ് സന്തോഷ്. ഏറ്റവും അവസാനം നമ്മൾ നന്ദി പറയാൻ മാറ്റി വെച്ചിരിക്കുന്നത് അത്രമാത്രം കടുപ്പിച്ച് പറയണമെന്നുള്ളത് കൊണ്ട് മാത്രമാണ്. നൺ അതർ ദാൻ ടോണി ജോസഫ്. ഞാൻ ടോണിയുടെ അദ്ദേഹത്തിൻ്റെ ഒരു ബുക്ക് ആദ്യം അജിത്ത് വായിക്കുകയും പിന്നെ അന്വേഷിച്ച് ഞങ്ങളെല്ലാവരും വായിക്കുകയും ചർച്ച ചെയ്യുകയും അടുത്ത പിൻഡോ ലെക്ചർ അദ്ദേഹത്തെ കൊണ്ടുവരണമെന്ന് ഞങ്ങൾ അതിയായിട്ട് ആഗ്രഹിക്കുന്നു. ഞങ്ങൾ വിചാരിച്ചില്ല, ഞങ്ങൾക്ക് അപ്രാപ്യമാണെന്നാണ് ഞങ്ങൾ കരുതിയത്. പക്ഷേ അദ്ദേഹത്തിൻ്റെ വളരെ താല്പര്യവും കേരളത്തിൽ വന്ന് ഇങ്ങനൊരു, എനിക്ക് തോന്നുന്നു ഇലാബറേറ്റായിട്ട് കേരളത്തിൽ ആദ്യത്തെ ആണെന്ന് തോന്നുന്നു ഇത്ര വലിയ വിശാലമായിട്ടൊരു സ്പീച്ച്. ഇദ്ദേഹത്തിൻ്റെ എല്ലാ യൂട്യൂബുകളും ഞങ്ങൾ ഫോളോ ചെയ്യും ഒക്കെ കണ്ടിട്ടുണ്ട്. പക്ഷേ ഇത് പറഞ്ഞു എന്ന് എനിക്കറിയില്ല. പക്ഷേ എന്നിരുന്നാലും ഞങ്ങൾ എൻ്റെ ഇടയ്ക്ക് മനസ്സിൽ വന്നൊരു സാധനം, നമ്മളെല്ലാം ഈ വലതുപക്ഷ തീവ്രവാദികളും എക്സ്ട്രീമിസ്റ്റുകളും എന്നൊക്കെ പറയുന്ന പോലെ ഭാരത് മാതാ കി ജയ് എന്നൊക്കെ നമ്മൾ വിളിക്കുമ്പോൾ നമ്മുടെ പുറകോട് 65,000 വർഷങ്ങൾക്ക് മുമ്പ് ഏർലി ഇന്ത്യൻസ് ഇന്ത്യയിലോട്ട് വന്ന ചരിത്രവും, അപ്പോൾ അവർക്കൊരു അമ്മയുണ്ടാവില്ലേ? അത് ഇദ്ദേഹം തന്നെ പലരും പറഞ്ഞിട്ടുണ്ട്. മൈറ്റോകോൺട്രിയൽ DNA ഹാപ്ലോ ഗ്രൂപ്പ് L3 ആണെന്ന് തോന്നുന്നു അല്ലേ, L3. അപ്പോൾ ശരിക്കും സത്യത്തിൽ നമ്മൾ പറയേണ്ടത് MT-DNA ഹാപ്ലോഗ് L3 കീ ചെയ്യുന്നതാണ് പറയുന്നത്. അതാണ് നമ്മുടെ അമ്മ. അദ്ദേഹം കുറച്ചുകൂടി പറയുകയും ചെയ്തിട്ടുണ്ട് പല സ്പീച്ചിൽ. അദ്ദേഹം വന്നതിനാൽ ടോണിയുടെ വാക്കുകൾ തന്നെ പറഞ്ഞാൽ ഇന്ത്യയിലെ ഏതൊരു സംസ്കാരം എടുത്താലും, നിങ്ങൾ മുകളിൽ നിന്ന് ഈ താഴെ വരെ എടുത്താലും, അതിൽ അദ്ദേഹം വേറൊരു വീഡിയോയിൽ വളരെ ഭംഗിയായിട്ട് പറഞ്ഞിട്ടുള്ളത്, ഒരു ചെറിയൊരു ഗ്രാമത്തിലെ മുകളിലും താഴെ 2 വിഭാഗങ്ങളും തമ്മിലുള്ള അന്തരം യൂറോപ്പിലെ നോർത്ത് യൂറോപ്പിലും സൗത്ത് യൂറോപ്പിലും ഉള്ള അന്തരത്തിൻ്റെ 3 ഇരട്ടിയാണെന്നാണ്. ഇന്ത്യയിൽ അത്രമാത്രം വളരെ സങ്കീർണതമാണ് നമ്മുടെ ഇന്ത്യയിലെ പ്രശ്നങ്ങൾ എന്നിരിക്കെ ഏത് സമൂഹത്തിലെടുത്താലും, നിങ്ങൾ ഏത് സംസ്കാരത്തിൽ ഇന്ത്യയിലെടുത്താലും അത് ഷെയർ ചെയ്യുന്നുണ്ട് എന്നുള്ള വളരെ സയൻറ്റിഫിക് ആയിട്ടുള്ള എവിഡൻസിൻ്റെ പുറത്ത് ഏത് സംസ്കാരം ഇവിടെ നിൽക്കണം, അല്ലെങ്കിൽ ഏതൊക്കെ സംസ്കാരങ്ങൾ നമുക്ക് പുറത്ത് നമ്മൾ കളയണം എന്ന രാഷ്ട്രീയം നമ്മൾ ചർച്ച ചെയ്യുന്ന വേണം. കാരണം വി ആർ ഓൾ മൈഗ്രൻസ് ആൻഡ് ഓൾ ഓഫ് us ആർ മിക്സഡ്. അദ്ദേഹത്തിൻ്റെ വളരെ റെലവൻ്റ് ആയിട്ടുള്ള കോട്ടിങ്സാണ്. ഇപ്പം സജീദ് നേരത്തെ പ്രസംഗത്തിൽ അനുസ്മരണത്തിൽ പറഞ്ഞതുപോലെ ഞങ്ങൾക്കൊരു പൊളിറ്റിക്സ് ഉണ്ട്. പിൻഡോ ബന്ധപ്പെട്ട ഒരു സൗഹൃദ വേദിക്ക് ഞങ്ങൾക്കൊരു പൊളിറ്റിക്സ് ഉണ്ട്. അത് ഇന്ത്യയിൽ ഇന്ന് വരെയുള്ള എല്ലാ സംസ്കാരങ്ങളെയും ഉൾക്കൊള്ളുന്ന സംസ്കാരമാണെന്നും അതിനെ ഒരു സംസ്കാരത്തെയും പുറകോട്ട് തള്ളേണ്ട, എല്ലാ സംസ്കാരങ്ങളെയും ഉൾക്കൊള്ളുന്ന ഒരു പൊളിറ്റിക്സാണ് ഞങ്ങളുടെ പൊളിറ്റിക്സ്. പണ്ട് നമ്മൾ വലതുപക്ഷ ചരിത്രകാരന്മാരൊക്കെ പറയായിരുന്നു ഇത് ഇടതുപക്ഷക്കാർ, നിങ്ങൾ പറഞ്ഞ ചരിത്രം ഇടതുപക്ഷ ചരിത്രക്കാർ എഴുതിയ ചരിത്രമാണ്, ഞങ്ങൾക്ക് വേറെ ചരിത്രമുണ്ട് എന്നൊക്കെ പലതും പറഞ്ഞു. പക്ഷേ അർത്ഥശങ്കയ്ക്കിടയില്ലാതെ, കാരണം കഴിഞ്ഞ 1 കൊല്ലം മുമ്പ് വരെയുള്ള ജനറ്റിക് സ്റ്റഡികൾ വരെ അദ്ദേഹത്തിൻ്റെ ബുക്കിനകത്ത് ഇൻക്ലൂഡ് ചെയ്തിട്ടുണ്ട്. അതിൽ 6 ഡിസിപ്ലിനുകളെന്ന് അദ്ദേഹം പലപ്പോഴും പറഞ്ഞിട്ടുള്ളതാണ്. 6 ഡിസിപ്ലിനുകളിൽ ഏറ്റവും പ്രധാനപ്പെട്ട ലിംഗ്വിസ്റ്റിക്, ആർക്കിയോളജിക്കൽ ആൻഡ് ജനറ്റിക്കൽ, വളരെ ശാസ്ത്രീയമായിട്ട് ഇതിന് 3നെയും കോർഡിനേറ്റ് ചെയ്തുകൊണ്ട് അർത്ഥശങ്കയ്ക്കില്ലാതെ നമ്മുടെ ചരിത്രം ഒരു ബുക്കിൻ്റെ രൂപത്തിൽ നമുക്ക് വരച്ചു കാട്ടി തന്നതിനും അതിലും ആ ബുക്കിലുള്ളതിലും അപ്പുറമാണ് അദ്ദേഹം ഇന്ന് സംസാരിച്ച പലതും അതിലപ്പുറവും ആയിട്ട് വളരെ ആത്മാർത്ഥമായിട്ട് ഈ മറ്റ് രാജ്യങ്ങളിലേക്കുള്ള മറ്റ് ദേശങ്ങളിലേക്കുള്ള മൈഗ്രേഷൻ ഉൾപ്പെടെ അത് നമ്മുടെ മുമ്പിൽ ഇത് അവതരിപ്പിച്ചതിനും നമ്മളുടെ ഓരോരുത്തരുടെയും പേരിൽ, നമ്മളുടെ എല്ലാവരുടെയും പേരിൽ ഞങ്ങളുടെ ഹൃദയം നിറഞ്ഞ നന്ദി, ആത്മാർത്ഥമായ നന്ദി ഞങ്ങൾ പ്രകാശിപ്പിച്ചു.
താങ്ക് യു.
ഒരു അഭ്യർത്ഥന കൂടെ ഉണ്ട്. ഡോക്ടർ PJ ചെറിയാൻ പോയി, പക്ഷേ അദ്ദേഹമൊക്കെ കേരള ചരിത്രത്തിലൊക്കെ ഒരുപാട് ചെയ്തിട്ടുള്ളതാണ്. അദ്ദേഹം ഓൾറെഡി ടോണി പറഞ്ഞു കഴിഞ്ഞു ഇതിൻ്റെ അടുത്ത ബുക്ക് പ്രതീക്ഷിക്കാമെന്ന്. ഞങ്ങൾ ഒരു റിക്വസ്റ്റ് ഉള്ളത്, ഇത് ഇത്തരത്തിലുള്ള DNA സ്റ്റഡികളും ഒക്കെ ആയിട്ട്, കാരണം സോക്കോൾഡ് സവർണ ഹിന്ദുക്കൾ കേരളത്തിൽ വരുന്നതിന് മുമ്പ് വന്ന സെമിറ്റിക് മതങ്ങളുണ്ട് എന്ന് പറയപ്പെടുന്ന കേരളത്തെക്കുറിച്ച് ഈ ജനിതകമായിട്ടും ഇത്രയധികം സയൻറ്റിഫിക് ആയിട്ടുള്ള അവബോധത്തോടു കൂടിയുള്ള ഒരു ബുക്ക് ഞങ്ങൾ പ്രതീക്ഷിക്കുന്നുണ്ട് കേരള ചരിത്രത്തെക്കുറിച്ച്. അത് ഇന്ത്യൻ ചരിത്രത്തിന് എന്തായാലും വിഭിന്നമാണെന്ന് നമുക്ക് എല്ലാവർക്കും അറിയാവുന്ന സ്ഥിതിക്ക് അവസാനമായി നിർത്തുകയാണ്. അവസാനമായിട്ട് ഞാൻ നേരത്തെ പറഞ്ഞ പോലെ തന്നെ ഞങ്ങളുടെ തുടർന്ന് അടുത്ത കൊല്ലത്തെ പിൻഡോ കൺവീനർ ഞാനാണ്. ഞാനിപ്പോഴേ ഇപ്പോഴേ വലിയൊരു ആശങ്കയിലാണ്, കാരണം ഇതിലപ്പുറമായിട്ട് വേണം ഇനി ചെയ്യാനായിട്ട്. അപ്പം അതുകൊണ്ട് രണ്ട് കാര്യങ്ങൾ നിങ്ങളിത് ഞങ്ങൾ പ്രതീക്ഷിക്കുന്നു. ഒന്ന്, ചെറുതെങ്കിലും ചെറിയൊരു സാമ്പത്തിക സഹായം. ഇന്ന് ദിനേശൊക്കെ വെളിയിൽ നിൽപ്പുണ്ട്, പറ്റുന്നവർ പലരും എനിക്കറിയാം, പലരും ഞങ്ങളെ കോൺട്രിബ്യൂട്ട് ചെയ്ത് സഹായിച്ച് കഴിഞ്ഞവരാണ്. എന്തെങ്കിലും സഹായിക്കുക. രണ്ടാമത്തെ, അതിനേക്കാളുപരി ഞങ്ങളൊരു ഒരു പേപ്പർ സർക്കുലേറ്റ് ചെയ്തിട്ടുണ്ട്. അതിനകത്ത് നമ്പറും ഫോൺ നമ്പറുള്ള എല്ലാവരും ഒന്നിലും അത് ഏൽപ്പിക്കുക, ഞങ്ങളെ ആരെങ്കിലും ഏൽപ്പിക്കുക, അല്ലെങ്കിൽ ഇവിടെ ലീവ് ചെയ്യുക. കാരണം ആ നമ്പറും കോൺടാക്റ്റും അനുസരിച്ച് അടുത്ത ജൂലൈ 5 ഒരു ഞായറാഴ്ചയാണ്. അത് നമുക്കൊരു വലിയൊരു സംഭവമാക്കി, വലിയൊരു ലെക്ചറാക്കി അടുത്ത കൊല്ലം 2020 നിങ്ങളെ എല്ലാവരും ക്ഷണിക്കാനായിട്ട് ഞങ്ങൾക്ക് നിങ്ങളുടെ കോൺടാക്ട് ഡീറ്റെയിൽസുകൾ വേണം. അത് എഴുതിയവർ ഞങ്ങളെ ആരെങ്കിലും ഏൽപ്പിക്കുക. എല്ലാവർക്കും ഒന്നുകൂടെ നന്ദി പറഞ്ഞുകൊണ്ട് നിർത്തും.
യോഗം അവസാനിച്ചു.